Ugrasena, the righteous king of Mathura, fathered 9 sons and 5 daughters, and was the biological father of Kunti, with his eldest son being Vasudeva. In an act of familial diplomacy, Ugrasena gave his daughter Pritha to Kunti Bhoja. Although Ugrasena held the throne, another influential figure in the kingdom, his closest ally and confidant Ugrasena, wielded significant power. Ugrasena, also a man of virtue, served as the chief minister and was essential in Ugrasena's rule. Vasudeva and Ugrasena's son Kamsa grew up as close friends, but their temperaments could not have been more different. Kamsa was ambitious, dominant, and drawn to power, while Vasudeva embodied humility, often immersing himself in the simple joy of farming. Vasudeva found fulfillment in nurturing seeds, watching them grow into trees that bore fruits and flowers. His gentle, sacrificial nature extended even to his friendships, forming a close bond with Nanda, the son of a cattle rearer from Gokula. Kamsa, however, disapproved of these friendships and relationships with low-born people like Nanda, viewing them as beneath their royal station. Kamsa, with his naturally commanding nature, said this to Vasudeva in an authoritative tone, attempting to assert his dominance. But Vasudeva, free from the constraints of caste and status, saw no such divide. To assert his authority and remind Kamsa of his rightful place, Vasudeva, in a calm yet commanding tone, ordered Kamsa's personal guards to accompany him. The soldiers, bound by their duty to obey the prince, immediately followed Vasudeva's command, leaving Kamsa standing alone. The silence that followed made it clear to Kamsa that, despite his growing influence, he was still not in a position to challenge the authority of the royal family. Tragedy struck suddenly with the unexpected death of Ugrasena, leaving the kingdom of Mathura in a state of confusion and turmoil. Ugrasena had not officially named Vasudeva as his successor, and this omission sparked chaos in the royal court. If Vasudeva had been declared crown prince before his father's demise, there would have been no question as to who would ascend the throne. But now, the ministers were divided. Some advocated for Vasudeva to take the throne, while others argued that his gentle nature and disinterest in governance disqualified him from kingship. Vasudeva, still reeling from the grief of his father's death, had no desire for power. Despite Ugrasena's efforts to unite the council in support of Vasudeva, the heartbroken prince rejected the throne. In the face of this refusal, the council of ministers and royal gurus chose Ugrasena as the successor to Ugrasena, and he was crowned king of Mathura. Balika, the brother of the mighty Shantanu, who was abducted by his uncle out of deep affection for him, renamed his own kingdom as Balika Kingdom in love for his nephew. Balika's life followed a path marked by dedication and duty. After many years, he was blessed with a son, Saumadatha, whom he raised with boundless love and care. However, the joy of fatherhood was shadowed by a sad revelation from the royal physicians. They declared that Balika's wife would not be able to bear another child. Though deeply saddened by this, Balika chose to follow in his father Pratipa's righteous footsteps, vowing to have only one wife in his lifetime, never seeking another. Years passed, and Saumadatha grew into a fine man, eventually marrying and preparing to carry on the family legacy. Yet, unexpectedly, At an age when Balika should have been welcoming grandchildren, fate intervened in an astonishing way. His wife, defying all expectations, became pregnant once again. It was a moment that filled Balika's heart with unexpected joy. This time, they were blessed with a daughter, whom they named Rohini. Though the arrival of a daughter at his advanced age caused murmurs within the society, with many subtly mocking him for fathering a child so late in life, Balika remained steadfast in his love for her, undeterred by the whispers of the world. Rohini became the light of Balika's later years, and he raised her with the same affection and care he had shown his son. When Rohini reached the age of marriage, many proposals came from various kingdoms, but one, in particular, caught Balika's attention. A proposal from Mathura. The bridegroom was none other than Prince Vasudeva, known not for his thirst for power, but for his quiet nature and disinterest in kingship. Like Balika's own elder brother Devaki, who had renounced his throne and retreated to the Himalayas, Vasudeva had stepped aside, relinquishing his claim to the throne for others. The proposal, personally sent by Marisha, the mother of Vasudeva, resonated deeply with Balika. Here was a man who mirrored the values of humility and detachment that Balika admired so greatly. With a sense of peace and fulfillment, Balika agreed to the marriage, seeing in it not only a bright future for his daughter, but also the continuation of a noble legacy. Thus, Rohini was married into the noble family of Mathura, sealing a union that transcended the ordinary politics of marriage, founded instead on virtue and shared values. Despite the political changes, Vasudeva maintained his friendships with both Kamsa and Nanda, showing the steadfastness of his character. Kamsa continued to rise in influence. Though Ugrasena held the official title of king, it was Kamsa who moved the levers of power, building strong connections with the ministers, military commanders, and even some of the royal gurus. Ugrasena, proud of his son's ability to forge these key alliances, named Kamsa the crown prince of Mathura. After the marriage of Prince Kamsa to Jarasanda's two daughters, Asti and Prapti, a profound bond began to form between Kamsa and the mighty ruler of Magadha, drawn irresistibly to Jarasanda's immense power and influence. Kamsa quickly found himself under the powerful king's mentorship. Inspired by Jarasanda's strength and cunning, Kamsa introduced wrestling as a prominent sport in Mathura, immersing himself both as an eager participant and an enthusiastic spectator. Jarasandha, recognizing Kamsa's fierce and dominant nature, personally instructed him in the art of wrestling, passing on his own carefully guarded techniques. Their relationship soon transcended that of mere allies. Jarasandha saw in Kamsa a reflection of his own ruthless ambition. In time, their bond grew deeper, resembling that of a father and son. In fact, Jarasandha grew so fond of Kamsa that his affection for the young prince even surpassed his love for his own daughters. Kamsa, in turn, thrived under this powerful alliance, feeling empowered by the guidance and approval of the formidable Jarasandha. Bhishma, reflecting deeply on the delicate alliance between Jarasandha and Ugrasena, became aware of the looming danger posed by Mathura. which now shared a direct border with the Kuru kingdom. To unravel the inner workings of Ugrasena's court, Bhishma dispatched a network of spies disguised as traders. Their task was to gather every possible piece of intelligence, like personal habits, family connections, political allegiances, religious devotions, and the mindsets of those in power. In a matter of days, the spies returned with extensive information. They revealed how Ugrasena had ascended to the throne following the death of Surasena, the close bond between his son Kamsa and Jarasandha, and the soft nature of Vasudeva, the rightful heir to Mathura, who had recently married Rohini, Bhishma's uncle Balika's daughter. Although Balika was closely related to Bhishma, their familial ties had long since faded, rendering that connection nearly irrelevant in the current political landscape. Much of the information seemed unremarkable, but one detail caught Bhishma's attention. Ugrasena's brother, Devaki, who was the feudatory of the Mahavana region, had a daughter named Sulabha. She was born to a Shudra woman, a maidservant whom Devaki loved equally to his other daughter, Devaki, who was born to his official wife. This piece of information sparked an idea in Bhishma's mind. Bhishma sent a message to Devaki, proposing a marriage alliance between his daughter, Sulabha, and Vidura, the Grand Minister of Hastinapura, who was also born to a Shudra woman. Devaki was surprised by the proposal, especially coming from Hastinapura, which opposed Jarasandha. Although it was his decision to make, Devaki traveled to Mathura to discuss the matter with his brother, King Ugrasena, because in the current geopolitical climate, marriages were critical events that require careful consideration. Ugrasena, a pragmatic thinker, saw through Bhishma's strategic intentions. He understood that the marriage proposal was an attempt to form an alliance with Mathura, a kingdom now bordering the powerful Kuru Empire. Though Jarasandha held considerable influence, Hastinapura was a kingdom not to be underestimated, and Ugrasena recognized the wisdom in maintaining cordial relations with both powers. Kamsa objected vehemently to the proposal, insisting that it would displease Jarasandha, whose interests were paramount to him. But Ugrasena, maintaining his royal authority, reminded Kamsa that they were allies of Jarasandha, not his slaves. The decision of who to marry their daughters was a sovereign one, not something dictated by another ruler, even one as powerful as Jarasandha. Kamsa, growing increasingly agitated, argued that informing Jarasandha of the marriage would demonstrate respect and strengthen their alliance. Devaki, countering Kamsa's argument, pointed out that seeking Jarasandha's approval for a marriage within their own family would make Mathura appear weak, as if it needed permission to make internal decisions. The disagreement escalated into a heated argument, with Kamsa refusing to yield. Finally, Ugrasena, firmly asserting his authority, reminded Kamsa that he was not the king and that defying his father's orders was equivalent to defying the king himself. With those words, Kamsa reluctantly backed down, though his resentment simmered beneath the surface. Devaki, following Ugrasena's counsel, sent a message to Bhishma accepting the marriage proposal. Unbeknownst to them, Kamsa, in secret defiance, sent his own message to Jarasandha, informing him of the situation and ensuring that his allegiance to the Magadha king remained unwavering. Pandu, burdened by the heavy curse of Mandavya, was sinking deeper into sorrow. His mind, usually sharp and decisive, now spiraled in confusion as he pondered the cruel twist of fate that had befallen him. Despite all his conquests, the victories that secured his kingdom and vanquished enemies for generations to come, the curse weighed heavily on his heart. He felt utterly defeated, not by the enemies he had faced on the battlefield, but by destiny itself. His lineage, his future, had been snatched from him. No children meant no heir, and that thought consumed him. Kunti and Madri, noticing Pandu's change in demeanor, were troubled by his somber mood. His once resolute presence had faded, replaced by silence and an unspoken despair. Though Kunti, in her concern, repeatedly questioned him about the sorrow etched on his face, Pandu kept the truth locked inside, unable to share the weight of his burden. Amidst his internal turmoil, a message from Hastinapura arrived. Vidura's marriage had been arranged, and the royal family requested Pandu's presence at the grand celebration. Kunti and Madri were filled with joy at the news, hoping this occasion might lift Pandu's spirits. But their happiness was not mirrored in Pandu's expression. They sensed that something deeper plagued him, though they could not grasp the full extent of his pain. The three made their way back to Hastinapura, where preparations for Vidura's marriage to Sulabha were in full swing. Despite Vidura's steadfast devotion to Dharma and his unwavering loyalty to the kingdom, even he now embraced the warmth of family life, which brought immense joy to his heart. This union, though unconventional due to Sulabha's origins, was met with silent approval from both Bhishma and Ugrasena, who saw the marriage as a quiet yet significant bond between their realms. Devaka's affection for Sulabha was unwavering, equal to that for his other daughter, Devaki. This marriage was more than a mere celebration. It signaled the forging of subtle alliances and the strengthening of bonds between Hastinapura and Mathura. Though unspoken, the union represented a quiet pact, one that Bhishma and Ugrasena both silently acknowledged. Amba, consumed by her desire for vengeance, entered into deep penance from the very day she left the battlefield of Kurukshetra. After the battle between Bhishma and Parashurama, her singular goal was the death of Bhishma, and she performed intense tapasya, invoking divine intervention to fulfill her wish. After many years of unwavering devotion, the day finally arrived when Lord Shiva appeared before her. Without uttering a single word, the Lord bestowed upon her a silent boon. Through her heightened consciousness, Amba understood that she would be the reason for Bhishma's death, not in this life, but in the next. With her purpose now clear and her heart set on the divine will, Amba's long and arduous penance finally came to an end. No longer burdened by uncertainty, she moved with a calm yet fierce resolve. She carefully gathered dry sticks and branches, placing them methodically into a towering pyre. Each step she took was filled with the gravity of her decision. Yet she showed no hesitation and no fear, only the determined fire of her unwavering mission. As the fiery pyre stood ready before her, Amba's face reflected a strange peace, a peace born from the knowledge that her life had not been in vain. and that her next existence would fulfill the divine promise. With eyes closed in solemn prayer and arms outstretched, she walked into the consuming flames, fully aware that this act was only the beginning, not the conclusion, of her destiny. Destiny bound with the fall of Bhishma in her next life. Even while the fire consumed her mortal body, she embraced the fire not as an end, but as a gateway to her next incarnation. After facing the stinging humiliation of Hastinapura's initial rejection in the presence of his ministers and commanders, Drupada, the proud king of Panchala, resolved never to rely on the strength of other kingdoms again. The rejection had shaken his stature, but it ignited in him an unyielding determination to fortify his kingdom from within. He envisioned Panchala that would stand strong, independent, and invincible, and thus embarked on an ambitious mission to build his own mighty army. Drupada scoured every corner of his kingdom, recruiting the strongest men into his forces. He instilled in them a fierce dedication not to the king, but to the kingdom itself, fostering a deep-rooted loyalty to Panchala. This principle of unwavering allegiance would ensure that, even if fate led them to serve another ruler, their hearts would always belong to their homeland. To arm his soldiers with the best weapons, Drupada sought out the most skilled swordsmiths from his and neighboring allied kingdoms. Under his direction, they forged new, advanced swords, lighter, faster, and deadlier than any previously known. He also pioneered the creation of compact bows, threaded with durable deerskin, capable of shooting arrows with the precision and distance of larger bows, but with far greater ease. To attract more recruits, Drupada offered his warriors better pay and benefits than other kingdoms, ensuring that the finest men flocked to his banners. Within a remarkably short time, his army swelled to 7 times its previous size, each soldier not only physically formidable, but also equipped with cutting-edge weaponry and unbreakable resolve. At his side was his wife, Prashati, a woman of both loyalty and intellect. Drupada often sought her counsel in matters of governance and strategy, and she became his trusted advisor. Though he had built a formidable kingdom and army, a shadow of dissatisfaction loomed over Drupada's heart. Despite all his efforts, the memory of the humiliation he faced after Hastinapura's initial message lingered. Even though a second message had arrived, correcting the first, the damage to his reputation had been done. Drupada suspected that Bhishma, the mastermind behind Hastinapura's decisions, had deliberately orchestrated the 2 conflicting messages to mock and belittle him. No matter how much he strengthened his forces, Drupada knew that his army alone was not enough to defeat the legendary Bhishma, who was more than a warrior. He was an indomitable force. The king realized that mortal strength would not suffice. He needed divine intervention. Burdened by this thought, Drupada turned to Prashati for guidance. With her usual wisdom, she suggested that they seek the favor of Lord Shiva through intense penance, praying for a son who would possess the strength and power to vanquish Bhishma. Drupada, filled with newfound hope and resolve, prepared himself for this spiritual pursuit, understanding that only divine intervention could tilt the scales of fate in his favor. Thus, the king who sought to reshape the destiny of Panchala through the might of his army now looked to the gods for the power to fulfill his deepest desire, a son destined to not only challenge but defeat Bhishma. Drupada's longing went beyond mere victory. It was driven by the need to restore his honor. He wished to strike at Bhishma's very ego, to make him face the same humiliation that had scarred Draupadi in front of his court. Jarasandha responded to Kamsa's message with a strategic concern. He acknowledged that, although Ugrasena was the king of Mathura, familial bonds between its feudatories and external powers could not be allowed to bring about a conflict of loyalties, especially when the future balance between Hastinapura and Magadha was at stake. Jarasandha emphasized that, since Devaki, the feudatory of Mahavana, had already allied himself with Hastinapura by marrying off one of his daughters, Sulabha, to Vidura, his other daughter, Devaki, should be wed to someone firmly rooted in Mathura. This would ensure that any allegiance to Magadha remained unquestioned and unwavering. Keeping this in mind, Kamsa waited patiently for the opportune moment to act, and now that moment had arrived. He sought out Vasudeva at the stadium in Mathura. It was an unusual sight, for the gentle-natured Vasudeva, who normally abhorred violence, was intently watching sword fights and wrestling matches. Kamsa, curious about this unexpected change in his friend's behavior, approached Vasudeva with friendly inquiry. Vasudeva, weighed down by sorrow, shared the turmoil that had plagued his heart. Despite his marriage to Rohini and subsequent marriages to Vrikadevi, Madira, Bhadra, and Paravi, none of his wives had borne him a child. The absence of children cast a shadow of despair over his life, leaving him questioning whether he would ever experience the joy of fatherhood. It was this anguish that had driven him to the stadium that day, not for the sport, but to seek solace in his friend Sini, a great warrior from the Vrishni lineage who was competing in the arena. As they spoke, Sini finished his bout and approached Vasudeva. Kamsa, recognizing the depth of his friend's pain, seized the moment to share news from Devaki's house. The Swayamvara for Devaki had been arranged, and Kamsa suggested that Vasudeva attend and consider marrying her. Although Vasudeva had been wed several times before and doubted whether another marriage would change his fortunes, Sini and Kamsa both urged him to take this opportunity. Sini, always the voice of optimism, reminded Vasudeva that fate often worked in mysterious ways, and they never truly knew what the future held. Encouraged by his two closest friends, Vasudeva agreed to attend Devaki's Swayamvara. Sini, ever loyal, offered to accompany him, ensuring that Vasudeva would not face this new chapter of his life alone. Thus, with a mixture of hope and uncertainty, Vasudeva prepared to embark on another journey in search of the family he longed for. The grand Swayamvara of Devaki was set in motion, with kings and princes from many kingdoms assembling to win the hand of the renowned princess. Among the attendees were Saumadatha, the son of Balika, and Vasudeva, accompanied by his close friend, the valiant Sini. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as Devaki, Devaki's father, formally welcomed the dignitaries and announced that the Swayamvara would proceed in the simplest yet most profound manner, where Devaki herself would choose her groom from those present. This announcement was met with respect from all, except for one dissenting voice. Saumadatha, filled with pride, questioned the fairness of allowing a bride to make such a choice. He argued that a mere glance could never determine a warrior's true worth. insisting that a man's value should be judged by his prowess in battle, not by his appearance. Devaki, however, remained calm and resolute. He reminded Samadatta that while battles may reveal valor, they do not show the heart, and that the union of souls is guided by destiny. It was, therefore, Devaki's sacred right to choose her husband. Unmoved by Devaki's wisdom, Samadatta, brimming with confidence, proclaimed that his point alone demonstrated his superiority, unlike the other kings who remained silent. Samadatta boldly announced that he was the best among everyone, believing his willingness to fight proved his superiority. With this display of courage, he was certain that Devaki would choose him as her groom. Stood confidently at the center of the hall, fully expecting Devaki's garland to be placed around his neck. But as Devaki gracefully entered the hall, her eyes scanned the gathered nobles. With a steady pace, she walked past each king and prince, her gaze soft yet decisive. When she approached Samadatta, she paused for a brief moment, acknowledging his presence, but then moved past him without a second thought. Samadatta's pride turned to fury as he watched her walk towards Vasudeva, and when she raised the garland to crown him, Samadatta's anger erupted. In a loud, commanding voice, Samadatta demanded the ceremony be halted, declaring it a grave insult to him, the mightiest warrior present, to be passed over in favor of a Yadava prince, who, in his words, couldn't even wield a sword. His fury grew as he proclaimed that Devaki's decision was not only an affront to him, but a dishonor to every warrior attending the Swayamvara. Vasudeva, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke with calm authority. He addressed Samadatta, saying, "It is clear that Devaki has already made her choice, which means, by her decision, she now stands as a sister to Samadatta," and asked him not to prolong this quarrel further. But Samadatta, consumed by his rage, refused to accept this reasoning. In a burst of anger, he declared that he would defeat Vasudeva in a duel and marry Devaki, which makes her sister to Vasudeva instead of him. Sini, unable to tolerate Samadatta's disrespect any longer, rose to his feet with steady resolve. With controlled intensity, he declared that whatever Samadatta considered dishonor up to this point was nothing compared to what would happen if he didn't shut his mouth and sit down, and if he failed to respect the bride's choice. Sini would ensure that Samadatta experiences the true taste of insult. Samadatta, now seething with rage, took Sini's words as a direct challenge. His pride shattered, he roared with indignation, daring Sini to face him in battle. Insulting Vasudeva further, he scoffed that the prince lacked even the courage to defend himself, leaving his friend to speak in his place. And to start the attack, he reached for his sword with the intent to assert his dominance. But before he could fully unsheath it, Sini swiftly intervened. In a display of sheer strength, Sini delivered a powerful kick, sending Samadatta crashing to the ground. The once proud prince, who had boasted of his unmatched valor, found himself utterly vulnerable. As he struggled to rise, Sini struck him again, forcing him back to the floor. The assembled kings and princes, who had been silent during Samadatta's previous challenges, now erupted in laughter, mocking the man who had spoken so grandly of his prowess. Every attempt Samadatta made to regain his footing was met with another relentless assault from Sini. Kicks rained down, and before Samadatta could react, Sini grabbed him by the hair, dragging him across the grand hall, further intensifying his humiliation. The blows continued as Sini struck him repeatedly, both with his fists and feet, while Saumadatha, a prince of the royal Kuru dynasty, was reduced to a spectacle. The humiliation was unbearable. Even a respectful defeat in a sword duel would have been far more dignified. But here, Saumadatha was being manhandled like a common criminal, a stark contrast to the heroic image he had tried to project. Sini, brimming with confidence, mockingly taunted Saumadatha, suggesting that without a weapon in hand, he was defenseless. He offered him another chance, daring him to pick up his sword and fight. But Saumadatha, overwhelmed by the sheer humiliation and the laughter of his peers, could not bring himself to face the challenge. The pain of the physical blows paled in comparison to the shame that pierced his heart, knowing that the kings and princes who once stood silent were now laughing at his downfall. He could not even bring himself to glance in Devaki's direction, as the weight of his humiliation was too heavy on his soul. Defeated both in spirit and body, Saumadatha lowered his head in humiliation and slowly walked out of the grand hall. As he exited, Sini, his victory undeniable, turned to the remaining kings and princes in the court, issuing a final challenge that, if anyone still opposed Vasudeva as Devaki's rightful choice, they were welcome to step forward and face him. Having witnessed the utter humiliation of Saumadatha and the sheer strength of Sini, none of the remaining kings or princes dared to accept the challenge. With the matter settled, Devaki approached Vasudeva and placed the garland around his neck, sealing her choice. Devaka, pleased with the outcome, consulted with the Brahmins and set an auspicious time for the marriage. Invitations were sent throughout the kingdom and across the continent, announcing the grand union of Vasudeva and Devaki. The grand marriage of Devaki and Vasudeva was arranged by Devaka with immense grandeur, and invitations were sent far and wide throughout the kingdom. Feudatories from all Yadava clans attended the auspicious ceremony, with both Kamsa and Ugrasena present, adding to the splendor. The occasion was nothing short of magnificent, filled with joy, blessings, and celebrations. After the marriage rites, Kamsa, in a gesture of personal involvement, chose to drive the chariot himself to escort Devaki and Vasudeva back to Mathura. As the chariot moved along, a strange shift in the atmosphere took place. Dark clouds began to gather, and the sky grew ominously dim, as though a storm was about to break. Strange whispers echoed through the air, faint and indecipherable, sending a chill down their spines. All three heard the whispers, yet none could understand their meaning. The eerie sound of tinnitus filled their ears, unsettling them further. Kamsa, sensing something unnatural, halted the chariot. The winds howled, but soon even the gusts and thunder ceased, leaving a heavy silence in the air. It was then that a voice, clear and unmistakable, resounded from nowhere. A celestial akashvani, the voice spoke with unwavering clarity, foretelling Kamsa's doom, that the eighth son born to Devaki shall be the cause of Kamsa's death and will be his destroyer. The weight of this prophecy struck the three like a bolt of lightning. Kamsa, consumed by sudden terror, felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him. His fear quickly transformed into uncontrollable rage. In a moment of fury, he unsheathed his sword, his eyes wild with panic and wrath. Grabbing Devaki by her hair, he raised his blade, intent on ending her life then and there, believing that by killing her, he could prevent the prophecy from ever coming true. Vasudeva, horrified by Kamsa's sudden rage, immediately dropped to the ground, clasping Kamsa's feet in a desperate plea for mercy. With great humility and urgency, he silently implored Kamsa to reconsider his actions, conveying through his gestures that it was not Devaki who posed the threat to Kamsa's life, but rather the prophecy concerning her eighth-born. Vasudeva, with all the sincerity of a husband, offered a solemn vow. Each child born to them would be handed over to Kamsa to do with as he wished. His only plea was for the life of Devaki to be spared. Kamsa, still shaken by the prophecy but moved by Vasudeva's desperate plea, began to calm. Slowly, the fury in his eyes diminished, and he withdrew his sword. Reluctantly, he agreed to spare Devaki's life, but only under harsh conditions that every child born to Vasudeva and Devaki would be handed over to him for execution. Furthermore, to ensure his safety, Kamsa imposed another condition that both Vasudeva and Devaki would remain under his strict control, confined as though in house arrest. Though the immediate threat had passed, the ominous prophecy weighed heavily on Kamsa's mind, casting a long, dark shadow over the future. Asti gently questioned her husband's recent actions. She knew well the affection Kamsa held for his sister Devaki, yet he had raised his sword against her and confined her within the palace walls. Asti could not understand how he could house arrest someone he loved. However, Prapti quickly countered Asti's concerns. She argued that if Kamsa allowed his love for his sister to weaken him, they both might lose their husband to the prophecy. Though both were born to Jarasandha and married to Kamsa, the sisters had completely contrasting mindsets. Prapti fully supported Kamsa's decision to house arrest Vasudeva and Devaki, while Asti remained opposed to such extreme measures. Despite the harshness of his actions, Kamsa's heart softened when it came to his sister. He commanded Asti to ensure Devaki was well taken care of, her every need fulfilled, and to treat her with the respect she deserved. His conflicting emotions were evident, torn between the prophecy and his familial bonds. Nanda heard the distressing news of Vasudeva and Devaki's house arrest. Saddened, he shared the news with his wife Yashoda, who felt deep sorrow for the couple. Yashoda, too, had been childless for many years despite her marriage, and had once taken a heartfelt promise from Devaki that one of Devaki's children would be given to her to raise as her own. Knowing the gentle nature of Vasudeva and Devaki, Yashoda prayed fervently to the gods, hoping that such innocent souls would not face the cruel fate of losing their children to Kamsa's fear. Rohini, the first wife of Vasudeva, fled to Nanda's house in Gaukula, fearing that danger would inevitably come to her from Kamsa. Nanda and Yashoda were relieved that Rohini had escaped the palace and was now safe with them. As days passed, Devaki gave birth to her first son. Yet, instead of the joy a new mother should feel, her heart was heavy with sorrow, knowing that she must surrender her child to be killed by her brother. She wept in despair as Vasudeva took their newborn son, and true to his promise, began the journey to Kamsa's chambers. Meanwhile, Padmavati, Kamsa's mother, became aware of the dreadful events unfolding. Rushing to her husband Ugrasena, she informed him of what was happening. Ugrasena, who had been unaware of Kamsa's actions until now, was outraged. Without delay, he stormed into Kamsa's chambers just as his son was about to kill the infant. His voice thundered across the room as he commanded Kamsa to stop immediately. Kamsa, shocked by his father's sudden appearance, froze. Ugrasena berated his son, reminding him of the disgrace he had brought upon himself. He called Kamsa a baby killer, the most loathsome title any ruler could bear. He warned that killing newborns out of fear for his own life was nothing but a cowardly act. Kamsa tried to explain his actions to Ugrasena, claiming that if he didn't kill the child, the prophecy would come true and he would be slain by Vasudeva's son. But Ugrasena was furious at his son's stupidity, rebuking him for believing in some ethereal voice and taking such monstrous actions against his own family. With authority, Ugrasena, as king, threatened to imprison and punish Kamsa if he dared to harm the child. Having no choice, Kamsa reluctantly spared the infant's life. However, he declared that since the prophecy spoke of his death at the hands of the eighth son, he would not kill the first 7 children, but the 8th would be delivered to him for execution. Vasudeva and Devaki, despite the grim circumstances, felt immense relief that their firstborn was spared. Ugrasena, however, was not finished. He criticized Kamsa once more, warning him that as long as he lived, he would never allow any harm to come to Devaki's children. Kamsa, realizing that his father would never permit him to kill Vasudeva's children, fell into deep thought, plotting his next move. As days passed, Devaki gave birth to son after son, her heart heavy with the knowledge of the doom that awaited them. Kamsa, though consumed by the prophecy of his death, knew that to eliminate Vasudeva's children, he first needed to seize absolute control over the kingdom. Despite his influence over the military commanders and ministers, Ugrasena, his father, still wielded the authority of the throne. And as long as loyal ministers obeyed the king, Kamsa's desires would remain stifled. He understood that manipulating these ministers to follow his will would require cunning, and they would need to be swayed against their king. While Kamsa brooded over his next move, a celestial visitor arrived. Narada, the divine sage, son of the creator god, Brahma, and the wise messenger of the gods, descended from higher realms to meet Kamsa, Welcoming the revered sage, Kamsa laid bare his plight, expressing the intense mental turmoil he was undergoing. Narada, with a knowing smile, said that he had come not by chance but with a purpose. With a cryptic air, he began to reveal long-buried truths from Kamsa's past life. Narada informed Kamsa that in his previous incarnation, he was Kala Nemi, a feared and powerful asura. Kala Nemi had been renowned across realms for his might in physical combat and his mastery over the dark forces. As the chief commander of demonic armies, he had spread terror across various celestial worlds. Leading vast legions of Rakshasas, Kala Nemi had been a dominant force, combining brute strength with mystical powers capable of challenging the gods themselves. But his reign of terror had come to an end at the hands of Vishnu, the supreme god of the universe. As Narada recounted these tales, Kamsa's mind reeled. The revelation of his demonic past filled him with both awe and arrogance. Narada further explained that after Kala Nemi's death, the loyal Rakshasas' armies fled in fear of Vishnu's wrath, hiding in the remote caves of the Himalayas, waiting for centuries for the return of their leader. Kala Nemi, reborn as Kamsa, was the fulfillment of that hope. Narada then revealed an even darker secret. Kamsa, in this life, had been born not of Ugrasena, but due to the treacherous actions of an asura named Drumila, who had taken Ugrasena's form and deceived Padmavati, Kamsa's mother. This revelation emboldened Kamsa further, as he realized he was bound by blood to the ancient demonic forces, destined for power and greatness beyond what he had ever imagined. Kamsa, his confidence bolstered by this newfound knowledge, thanked Narada for revealing his true identity at such a crucial moment. He felt invincible, emboldened by the might of his past life, and ready to embrace his destiny as the leader of the Rakshasas. Narada, with a knowing glance, first inquired why Kamsa had spared the lives of Vasudeva's sons up until now. Kamsa, still confident, replied that the prophecy only spoke of the danger from the eighth child, so there was no need to kill the earlier ones. At this, Narada, with a sly smile, called Kamsa an innocent soul. Perplexed by this remark, Kamsa demanded to know what Narada meant. With deliberate calmness, Narada revealed the hidden truth, that it was the eighth son who would kill Kamsa, but only with the help of one of his brothers. The threat, Narada explained, was not limited to the eighth child, but any one of Vasudeva's sons along with the eighth son might play a part in Kamsa's destruction. Kamsa, alarmed by this revelation, prepared to kill the children immediately, but Narada cautioned him, advising that before he acted, Kamsa should first gain absolute control of the kingdom. To achieve this, Narada directed Kamsa to the Himalayas, where the Rakshasas, waiting for centuries, would be his loyal army. Their reunion would ensure Kamsa's dominance and secure his path to power. Taking Narada's advice to heart, Kamsa gathered the necessary details and without hesitation, set off on his journey to the formidable Himalayas, determined to meet his Rakshasa army and take his place as their long-awaited leader. There exist remote regions within the Himalayas, where the harsh and unforgiving climatic conditions make it nearly impossible for ordinary humans to tread. These treacherous terrains, rumored to be the earthly nexus for otherworldly beings such as Kimpurushas, Yokshas, and even Asuras, beings who are said to have departed from Earth millennia ago, are believed to serve as their hidden sanctuaries. It was toward these fabled, elusive realms that Kamsa now embarked on a perilous journey. As Kamsa ventured deeper into the treacherous terrain, the path grew increasingly formidable. First, the chariot and horses faltered, unable to withstand the rugged and unforgiving landscape. Then, even his loyal soldiers, worn down by the unyielding ascent and harsh elements, found themselves unable to proceed. Yet Kamsa, driven by an unwavering ambition to ascend as a dominant force, pressed on alone, undeterred by the escalating obstacles, his resolve hardening with every step. Seeking an audience with the Rakshasas who had awaited his return for centuries. Kamsa, guided by Narada's words and filled with a newfound sense of invincibility, ventured deep into the caves that the sage had described. The journey was arduous, with the treacherous path testing even his endurance. Yet Kamsa, driven by the promise of power, pressed on. Within the hidden depths of the caves, he encountered the infamous Rakshasas, Puthana, Trinovartha, and Ogasura. These malevolent beings had concealed themselves in the dark recesses of the earth, living in fear of Vishnu's wrath. For centuries they hid in fear, dreading that if they came out of hiding, the supreme god would destroy them. Upon seeing Kamsa, their terror transformed into hope. They recognized in him the reborn form of Kalanemi, their once great leader, reborn to save them from Vishnu's vengeance and restore the dominance of the Asuras on earth and other worlds. With their guidance, Kamsa performed a dark and ancient ritual, invoking the power of evil forces that existed beyond the known realms. The ritual restored to him the instincts and strength of Kalanemi, transforming him from a mere human into a formidable Rakshasa. The man who entered the cave as a prince of flesh and blood emerged as a being filled with demonic power, his cruelty magnified and his ambition sharpened. Upon his return to Mathura, Kamsa wasted no time in asserting his newfound authority. He sent word to Vasudeva, demanding the presence of all 6 of his sons. Vasudeva, along with his wife Devaki, trembled with fear as they approached Kamsa, clutching their children. Although they held a flicker of hope that Kamsa would honor his father Ugrasena's command and spare their sons, dread weighed heavily on their hearts. Once the doors of the chamber were shut, Kamsa's cruelty knew no bounds. He took the youngest child into his arms and without hesitation seized the infant by the leg and smashed him against the ground. The sickening sound of the baby's skull shattering echoed through the chamber as blood splattered onto Devaki's face. Paralyzed by the horror of what had just occurred, she barely registered what had happened until the gruesome reality set in. Her scream of despair pierced the air. Kamsa's murderous spree did not stop with the first child. One by one, he hunted down the elder children as they attempted to flee. With every capture, he mercilessly smashed their heads against the walls, laughing maniacally as their lifeless bodies fell to the floor. Vasudeva, desperate to stop the carnage, was thrown aside by Kamsa's men and restrained, helplessly watching the slaughter unfold. The sounds of his children's skulls cracking reverberated in Devaki's ears until she collapsed in grief, unable to bear the pain. Kamsa, consumed by his own arrogance, declared that no power in the universe could stop him. His laughter echoed through the palace halls, filling the air with terror. The news of the horrific massacre spread quickly. Padmavati, Kamsa's mother, fainted upon hearing what her son had done. Meanwhile, Ugrasena, the king, rushed to confront his son, flanked by his commander Ganavratha and a group of soldiers. Storming into the chamber, Ugrasena was met with the chilling sight of his son, still basking in his monstrous act. Furious, he berated Kamsa, condemning him for becoming a murderer of infants and the lowest of rulers. Kamsa, however, remained defiant, dismissing his father's words with arrogance, proclaiming that he was now beyond anyone's control. Ugrasena, outraged by his son's insolence, ordered Ganavratha to seize Kamsa and imprison him immediately. But to Ugrasena's horror, Ganavratha remained still. Kamsa, with a sinister smile, declared that loyalty followed strength, not lineage. It became clear to Ugrasena that the palace guards and commanders had already pledged their allegiance to Kamsa. Desperate, the king commanded his minister, Sutravega, to arrest both Kamsa and Ganavratha. But Sutravega too refused to act, leaving Ugrasena stunned and helpless. With a smirk, Kamsa ordered Ganavratha to arrest the king himself. Ugrasena, filled with a profound sense of betrayal, gazed into his son's eyes and warned him that history would remember him as the worst of rulers. Man who had committed the ultimate atrocities. Unfazed, Kamsa ordered his soldiers to drag Ugrasena to the dungeon. As the fallen king was taken away, Kamsa claimed the throne, and Grand Minister Sutravega publicly announced Kamsa as the new king of Mathura. Padmavati, devastated by her son's actions, approached him, pleading for him to come to his senses and release Ugrasena, urging him to seek his father's forgiveness. But Kamsa, his heart hardened by his newfound power, ordered that even his mother be imprisoned for speaking against him. In a final act of cruelty, he commanded that Vasudeva, Devaki, and all of Vasudeva's wives, Rikadevi, Madira, Bhadra, and Povravi, be thrown into the dungeons. The palace was gripped with terror. Vasudeva's wives, unaware of the horrors that had unfolded, were forcefully dragged from their chambers, their dignity stripped away as they were humiliated in front of the soldiers and handmaidens. Clad in torn garments, they were thrown into the dark, cold cells of the dungeon. Kamsa's descent into cruelty and madness was complete. It was as though some dark, otherworldly force had taken control of him, warping his mind and amplifying his innate cruelty. Most of the ministers had been swayed by Sutravega, while the few who remained loyal to Ugrasena were too fearful for their lives to speak up, knowing they were vastly outnumbered. Mathura, once a prosperous kingdom, was now ruled by a tyrant whose actions would echo through history as some of the darkest ever known. After the marriage of Vidura to Sulabha, Satyavati, recognizing Vidura's unwavering dedication to his ministerial duties, suggested that he take a break and embark on a vihara yatra with his wife. She observed that Vidura, always absorbed in the affairs of the state, had rarely taken time to enjoy his personal life. Even Dhritarashtra, acknowledging the need for Vidura to find balance and rejuvenate, supported the idea wholeheartedly. Thus, Vidura, along with Sulabha, set out on a peaceful journey, allowing them both to momentarily escape the responsibilities of the court and immerse themselves in the beauty and tranquility of nature. And when life returned to a semblance of normalcy in Hastinapura, Pandu made a shocking declaration that he would not reclaim the throne. His words sent ripples of astonishment through the royal court. Bhishma and Kripacharya, filled with disbelief, questioned Pandu's reasoning. It was then that Pandu, with great sorrow, revealed the curse bestowed upon him by Kindama Muni. Upon hearing this, Kunti and Madri were utterly devastated, their hopes for a future shattered in an instant. Bhishma, a man of immense wisdom and strength, was deeply pained by the revelation that the next king of Hastinapura would not be the son of the heroic Pandu, a warrior who had once seemed destined to rule and protect the land. Satyavati, Ambika, and Ambulika were similarly moved by the suddenness of this decision, their hearts heavy with the weight of the future. Even Dhritarashtra, who had harbored a simmering resentment toward Pandu, could not help but feel a deep sadness for his younger brother. Overcome by emotion, Dhritarashtra embraced Pandu, offering him a rare moment of brotherly concern, despite their long-standing rivalry. Pandu, resolute in his decision, announced that he would spend the rest of his days in the forest, living the life of a Muni, dedicating himself to penance and detachment from worldly pleasures. Kanika, the royal guru, suggested that Pandu perform danas and yagnas to alleviate the weight of the curse and ease the mental burden it brought. However, Pandu, steadfast in his resolve, refused to deviate from his chosen path. Despite the attempts of Bhishma, Satyavati, and his mother Ambulika to sway his decision, Pandu remained unyielding. Kunti, ever loyal to her husband, insisted that she would accompany him into the forest. Pandu, concerned for her well-being, explained that the curse was meant for him alone and that she need not share in his fate. Yet Kunti, with unwavering devotion, reminded him that every blessing and every curse is shared between husband and wife, and that she would prefer a life of hardship with him over a life of luxury without him. Madri, too, pleaded with Pandu, asking to join them in exile. Reluctantly, Pandu agreed to take both his wives with him into the wilderness. Meanwhile, Gandhari discovered that she was pregnant. Overjoyed by the news, she hurried to share it with Dhritarashtra, as she was unaware of Pandu's momentous announcement. The happiness in the room was palpable, but beneath it all lay the shadow of sorrow over Pandu's fate. Unsure of how to respond, the court remained silent, their emotions torn between joy and grief. Pandu, recognizing the gravity of the moment, was the first to congratulate Gandhari. With grace, he remarked that perhaps the gods had willed that the future king should be born from Gandhari's womb. With that, Pandu bid farewell to the royal family and, along with Kunti and Madri, departed from the palace. The entire royal household was left in deep sorrow at the departure of the great warrior who had shifted the balance of power across the Bharata continent. Yet, amidst this sea of grief, one figure was secretly pleased. Shakuni. He seized the moment to whisper insidious words into Dhritarashtra's ear, reminding him of how Pandu had always sought to keep him from the throne and humiliate him. Shakuni slyly suggested that it was Pandu's own scheming that had brought about his tragic fate, slowly easing Dhritarashtra's sadness as memories of Pandu's dominance over him began to surface. As Pandu, accompanied by his wives Kunti and Madri, walked through the streets of Hastinapura on his way to the forest, the people gathered in deep sorrow, aware that their beloved king was leaving them. They appreciated Pandu for his unwavering bravery in protecting the kingdom, throwing flowers at his feet as he passed by. Pandu, deeply moved by their respect, felt a sense of fulfillment despite the weight of his fate. Kunti and Madri, though grateful for the honor shown to their husband, could not help but feel sadness for the tragic destiny that lay ahead for them. Devaki and Vasudeva were confined together in the same cell by Kamsa, who cruelly believed that only after Devaki gave birth to 2 more children he could kill them, ensuring his survival and falsifying the prophecy of the akashvani. After witnessing the brutal murder of their 6 children, smashed to death by Kamsa's own hands, Devaki and Vasudeva were deeply shattered. The horrific scenes of their children's heads hitting the ground and walls replayed in their minds, leaving them emotionally wrecked and constantly in tears. In her anguish, Devaki expressed to Vasudeva that she could no longer endure the torment of bringing children into the world, only to witness their brutal deaths at the hands of Kamsa. The unbearable pain of seeing her offspring murdered drove her to despair, and she wished to avoid the tragedy of childbirth altogether, knowing the inevitable fate that awaited her children. But Vasudeva, though powerless to challenge Kamsa's cruelty, realized that their only hope of ending the tyrant's reign rested on the prophecy of their 8th child. With great effort, he convinced Devaki that their only salvation would come from this divine child. Not long after, Devaki found herself pregnant again. Upon hearing the news, Kamsa visited them in the dungeon, mocking his sister for conceiving even under such dreadful conditions. He warned her that this time he would waste no time before killing the child as soon as it was born. One night, in the cold, silent darkness of their dungeon, an extraordinary event unfolded that left Devaki and Vasudeva in a state of awe and disbelief. Out of nowhere, a luminous portal, shimmering with divine energy, appeared before their eyes. This was no ordinary light. It pulsated with a celestial aura, filling the damp, confined space with an otherworldly presence. From the portal emerged Yogamaya, the goddess of illusion, whose radiant form seemed to dissolve the despair that had long gripped them. Devaki and Vasudeva, who had been engulfed in grief and fear, were utterly astonished. They had never witnessed such a wondrous sight, and for a moment it felt as if the cruel dungeon had vanished, replaced by a divine realm. Their eyes widened in disbelief, hearts pounding with both trepidation and hope. This was a supernatural intervention, unlike anything they had ever imagined. Yogamaya, with her ethereal grace, spoke to the couple, her voice soothing yet powerful. She explained the divine mission, that she had come to prepare the path for Lord Vishnu's incarnation, the very savior destined to rid them of Kamsa's tyranny. She revealed the sacred plan. The 7th child, still growing in Devaki's womb, had to be safely transferred to the womb of Rohini, far from Kamsa's deadly reach. Despite their fears about the complexities of such a dangerous process, Devaki and Vasudeva, with renewed hope, entrusted their fate to the will of Vishnu. Yogamaya performed the extraordinary feat of removing the embryo from Devaki's womb, ensuring the child's safety. The celestial goddess then traveled through the portal to Nanda's house, where she successfully placed the embryo into Rohini's womb, astonishing Nanda and Yashoda with the divine occurrence. Kamsa, hearing the news of Devaki's miscarriage, laughed cruelly, thinking that the child had cleverly evaded his brutal fate. Little did he know that the divine play of destiny was far beyond his grasp. Pandu, having dedicated himself to the ascetic life for many days, still found no solace in his heart. The desire for children, a yearning that refused to dissipate, gnawed at his spirit. Pandu confided in his wife, Kunti, revealing his intention to approach the rishis and personally request that they perform the niyoga ritual and father children with her on his behalf. Kunti was struck by his words, shocked at the suggestion. She reminded Pandu of her unwavering loyalty, stating that she could never bear the thought of being with another man, even in her mind. She reiterated her role as his lawful wife, insisting that it was his duty to father their children, and once they were born, she would follow him to the other side of the world. Pandu, with a heavy heart, explained that the practice of niyoga was not regarded as wrong, and reminded her of how the Kuru lineage had been preserved through the intervention of Krishna Dvaipayana. He pleaded with her not to dismiss his request, sharing his inner torment, that the thought of dying without children would leave him restless even in the afterlife. Torn between her desire to remain faithful to Pandu and her reluctance to deny the one wish he had asked of her, Kunti found herself in deep inner conflict. Vidura, after returning from his Vihara Yatra, plunged into sorrow upon hearing of Pandu's self-imposed Vanavas. He was baffled by how such a thing could happen in the presence of Bhishma. How could Bhishma allow the greatest king of Hastinapura, the one who had neutralized Jarasanda's expansion across the Bharata continent through war, to retreat into the forest like a common man? Vidura could not fathom how a king who had fought alongside common soldiers on the battlefield and had risked his life for the kingdom could be sent away without protest. Pouring his sorrow before Bhishma, Vidura questioned why no one had stopped Pandu. Bhishma, though agreeing with Vidura's praise of Pandu, explained that no one could force a king to rule if his heart was unwilling. Pandu had chosen to relinquish his responsibilities, and forcing him to remain on the throne would have violated his freedom. Dhritarashtra, now basking in the kingship he had long coveted, reveled in his newfound power. His joy was heightened by the prospect that his own son would succeed him. Lost in the pleasures of life, Dhritarashtra indulged in drink and spent his nights with his 10 other wives, in addition to Gandhari. In his intoxicated state, he once mistook a maidservant, Sugata, for one of his wives and lay with her. Sugata, distressed by the incident, informed Gandhari of what had occurred. Understanding that the event happened due to Dhritarashtra's drunken state, Gandhari forgave Sugata, recognizing it as an unintentional mistake. Vidura, empathetic to Sugata's plight, realized that it was Dhritarashtra who needed Sugata's forgiveness, not the other way around. While Gandhari had already pardoned Sugata as if the fault lay with her, Vidura knew that true remorse should come from Dhritarashtra. Understanding the situation fully, Vidura humbly asked for Sugata's forgiveness on behalf of Dhritarashtra, acknowledging her suffering and treating the matter with the sensitivity it deserved. Dhritarashtra's bond with Shakuni deepened, and the two grew closer. Shakuni, ever the master of manipulation, dominated their gambling games, a pastime Dhritarashtra enjoyed with Shakuni and his charioteer, Sanjaya. Gandhari, who had been pregnant for an unusually long time, began to feel the weight of her strange condition. Though initially overjoyed by the news of her pregnancy, her happiness soon turned to sorrow as years passed without the birth of her child. The royal physicians were baffled, unable to explain the mystery of her prolonged pregnancy. The situation left Dhritarashtra frustrated, as he had expected to father 100 children, but had yet to see even one. Gandhari, once filled with hope, now spent her days in the palace's divine room, praying to Lord Shiva for deliverance. As time passed, her sorrow deepened, and she began to fear she would remain pregnant forever. Shakuni shared her grief, but his support did little to ease her pain. Bhishma, ever watchful of the Kuru dynasty's future, was deeply troubled by these unnatural events, fearing what might come of them. The burden of continuing the Kuru lineage now rested solely on the children of Dhritarashtra and Gandhari. The fate of Hastinapura and the entire Kuru dynasty now hung in the balance. Rohini, upon learning of the divine intervention that had placed an embryo in her womb, was overcome with an overwhelming sense of awe and wonder. The event was beyond the realm of natural understanding, leaving her grappling with emotions of fear and uncertainty. The miraculous nature of the occurrence weighed heavily on her heart. The very thought of being with the child while her husband, Vasudeva, was in imprisonment brought a deep sense of distress. Society's judgment loomed large in her mind. Rohini was acutely aware of the whispers and potential condemnation that could follow. People questioning her pregnancy while Vasudeva remained confined, fueling rumors about her integrity and honor. Nanda comforted Rohini with his gentle wisdom. He reassured Rohini, explaining that this was no ordinary event, but part of a greater divine plan. Nanda's words were filled with reverence and insight as he reminded her that she had been handpicked by the universe for an extraordinary role, to play a vital part in bringing the divine presence of Lord Vishnu into the world. Out of the innumerable beings on earth, it was Rohini who had been chosen, not by chance but by divine will, to carry the seventh child, the one destined to play a pivotal role in a cosmic plan. Nanda's comforting words filled Rohini with a sense of profound significance, making her realize that her situation was not just a burden, but a sacred responsibility. Yet, Nanda wisely reminded Rohini that this miraculous event had to remain a closely guarded secret. If word of this divine child reached Kamsa, the consequences could be catastrophic. Kamsa, with his cruel nature, would stop at nothing to eliminate any perceived threat to his reign, especially if he learned about the child growing in Rohini's womb. With this in mind, Rohini understood that not only was she entrusted with carrying a child of immense cosmic importance, but also with the grave duty of ensuring his safety by maintaining absolute secrecy until the right moment arrived. As time flowed gently in the serene village of Gokula, Rohini's initial anxieties gradually transformed into acceptance and joy. She fully embraced her sacred role in this divine journey. As the days passed, a sense of peace and fulfillment settled within her, accepting that she was part of a grand cosmic plan. Yashoda, too, had become pregnant, and this further uplifted both women's spirits. They shared moments of happiness and anticipation, imagining the future with their children, who would one day be companions bound by destiny. When the moment finally arrived, within the modest but tranquil home of Nanda, an extraordinary birth took place, unlike any other. The child emerged, radiating strength, calmness, and an innate grace that filled the room with an otherworldly presence. Overcome by the miraculous nature of his entry into the world, Rohini chose the name Sankarshana for the child. This name held deep symbolic meaning, the one who is drawn away, or the one who pulls together, capturing the essence of his miraculous transfer from Devaki's womb to hers. In this act, the divine forces had linked both mothers, binding them in an eternal fate tied to the child. The name signified not only the physical journey of the unborn child, but also his spiritual role in bringing together forces that would eventually confront the great evils of the world. With every glance at the serene infant, Rohini was reminded of the divine mission she had been entrusted with, as both she and the child stood at the center of a cosmic plan destined to reshape the world. Thus, this extraordinary birth, where a child was miraculously conceived in the womb of one woman and then born through another, was not just a physical wonder, but a profound cosmic event. It signified the orchestration of a divine plan that transcended the bounds of human understanding. The child, whom Adiratha Nandana had found in the golden chest, continued to grow under the loving care of Adiratha and his wife, Radha. The golden ornaments and jewelry from the chest had alleviated all of Adiratha's financial concerns, and soon he became one of the wealthiest men in the Sudha community. They named the boy Vasusena, and he was cherished by both his parents. Though raised as the son of a charioteer, Vasusena exhibited a deep fascination with the art of battle. Adiratha, however, harbored a constant fear for his son. The kavacha that was a part of Vasusena's body was no ordinary protection. It was a divine boon, and Adiratha worried that if anyone from the palace or someone connected to the royal family noticed this remarkable feature, they might feel threatened or envious. Fearing for his son's safety, he always ensured that the armor was concealed, advising Vasusena to never reveal it. Adiratha was perpetually anxious that someone would seek to harm his son out of jealousy or suspicion. He also instilled in Vasusena the importance of humility, repeatedly cautioning him never to speak against those of higher birth, such as kings and Brahmins. Yet, despite his father's teachings, Vasusena had a natural inquisitiveness, a questioning mind that constantly sought to understand the world around him. He would often ask, with genuine curiosity, why kings and Brahmins were considered superior to others. These questions deeply troubled Adiratha, who feared that if the wrong ears heard such inquiries, it could lead to dire consequences for his son. Vasusena's passion for archery was evident from an early age. He would craft bows and arrows from tree branches, not only practicing the skill himself, but also teaching his friends. Though his armor was concealed beneath his clothing, his golden earrings were always visible, gleaming and swaying, capturing the attention of everyone around him. As a result, the villagers quickly took notice of him and began calling him Karna, meaning earrings. His agility and activeness, along with his striking golden earrings, made him well known in the community. Over time, the name Karna became so prominent that many people were unaware of his real name. The fathers of his friends would often praise Vasusena to Adiratha, marveling at the boy's natural talent, remarking how he, without guidance, was able to craft his own weapons and train others. Though Adiratha outwardly responded with pride, internally he was filled with dread. He warned Vasusena countless times to stop practicing archery, going so far as to break or hide the bows his son made. Yet Vasudeva, driven by his unyielding love for the art, would always find a way to craft another bow and continue his practice in secret. Karna, driven by an innate passion for archery, began to devise his own methods. He practiced relentlessly, mastering techniques such as shooting moving targets with precision and calculating his shots by gauging the wind's direction and intensity. His friends, astounded by Karna's natural prowess, marveled at the ease with which he shared his insights with them, further cementing his reputation as a prodigy. As Karna's interest in archery grew, so did his ambition. He ventured deep into the forests, honing his skills by hunting swift animals like rabbits and deer. His goal was not the kill itself, but the challenge of hitting fast-moving creatures with accuracy. His friends often urged him to bring the hunted animals home, where they could showcase his talents to the neighbors, earning admiration for his remarkable abilities at such a young age. However, Karna refused. He knew that if his father, Adhiratha, discovered his secret archery practices, it would invite unwanted scrutiny. He was determined to keep his newfound skills hidden, avoiding any confrontation that might arise from his father's fear of him aspiring beyond his social rank. Thus, he continued practicing in silence, driven by a passion that burned brighter with each passing day. Adhiratha's fear for his son deepened over time as he watched Vasudeva's skills flourish. He knew that if those of highborn, such as the kings, became aware of a warrior of such extraordinary talent emerging from the Sudakula, they might not accept him due to his lower birth. This realization brought Adhiratha greater worry than pride, as he feared that Vasudeva's abilities could attract hostility and bring more danger than honor. After being deeply humiliated by his childhood friend, King Drupada of Panchala, Drona found himself without a home or means to provide for his family. With a newborn son and his devoted wife, Krupi, he spent many days living under the shelter of trees, wandering aimlessly in despair. Krupi, seeing their plight, gently suggested they go to her brother, Kripacharya, in Hastinapura. However, Drona's pride would not allow it. He remembered how he had once rejected Kripacharya's offer to come to Hastinapura in favor of seeking Drupada's aid. Now, with Drupada's rejection weighing heavily on him, Drona could not bear the thought of arriving at his brother-in-law's doorstep as a defeated man, seeking refuge. Determined not to be seen as a beggar, Drona reassured Krupi, saying that the world is vast, and their destiny is not limited to Panchala and Hastinapura. With that resolve, Drona began his journey, searching for work that would allow him to retain his dignity. But being a Brahmin, and one who possessed the rare and sacred knowledge of the Divyastras, Drona struggled with his heart. The thought of accepting menial labor that would diminish his stature was a bitter one. Eventually, he found work as a farmer, though the meager earnings barely sufficed to feed his wife and son. The great Drona, who held the wisdom of celestial weapons, now labored in the soil, his mind burdened with sorrow and his spirit weighed down by the injustice of his fate. Dhritarashtra's frustration peaked when his long wait for children bore no results, leading him to approach Gandhari at the Shiva Mandira, where he angrily accused her of deceit. He blamed her for the unfulfilled promise of bearing 101 children. Despite years of pregnancy, without even one child being born, Gandhari, deeply saddened, tried to explain that the delay in childbirth was beyond her control, but Dhritarashtra, consumed with anger, dismissed her words as lies. He declared himself the last king of the Kuru dynasty, placing the blame for its impending downfall squarely on Gandhari. Her husband's harsh words broke Gandhari's heart. In anguish, she turned to Lord Shiva, questioning why she was subjected to such cruel trials. Overcome with frustration, she struck her womb repeatedly, demanding the child to come out. After several blows, a lifeless fetus fell from her womb, leaving her devastated. Gandhari cried out in shock, realizing that she had carried nothing more than a lifeless fetus all these years. She collapsed in grief, and her handmaiden, Sugadha, eventually discovered her and reported the event to Satyavati. Physicians examined the fetus, determining that it was a miscarriage, a loss typically occurring in the early months of pregnancy. But after carrying the fetus for so many months, this event was unexpected and deeply shocking for everyone involved. There was no living child in her womb, which further emphasized the gravity of the situation. When Dhritarashtra received the news, his emotions surged between sorrow and fury. Despite the consoling efforts of Shakuni and Kanika, his grief only intensified. He bemoaned the cruelty of his fate, lamenting that his blindness and ill fortune were beyond his control. Yet he was forced to bear the weight of these burdens throughout his life. Now, to add to his suffering, the loss of a child left him feeling even more devastated, deepening his sense of despair as both a blind king and now a man without a successor. The entire royal family was shaken to the core by this devastating event. The weight of uncertainty hung heavily in the air, and even Bhishma found himself gripped by fear for the future. His heart ached as the loss of an heir loomed once again, threatening the very continuity of the lineage he had fought so hard to protect. The pain in Satyavati's eyes reflected the same anguish. Her hopes of seeing the Kuru bloodline continue seemingly dashed. In their desperation, both Bhishma and Satyavati turned to the only force they believed could reverse the cruel hand of fate. With urgency in their hearts, they summoned the great sage Vyasa, the son of Satyavati. The palace was silent with anticipation as Vyasa arrived, his presence offering a glimmer of hope in the midst of sorrow. He approached the lifeless fetus, his eyes closing in deep contemplation as he connected with the life force. After a moment of profound silence, Vyasa opened his eyes, and with a calm yet reassuring voice, he declared that all was not lost. Though it appeared as if all hope had perished, life still lingered within the fetus. His words sent a ripple of relief through the room. Bhishma, who had felt the weight of despair crushing his spirit, felt his heart lighten for the first time in days. His hope was rekindled. Perhaps, against all odds, the future of the Kuru dynasty was still within reach. This revelation, though small, became a beacon of light in the darkest of times, offering a fragile thread of hope to those who had already begun to grieve. The divine intervention they sought had arrived just in time, and with it came the belief that the Kuru lineage would endure yet again. Vyasa, understanding the immense grief of Gandhari and her desire for 101 children as a boon from Lord Shiva, devised a method to preserve the future of the Kuru dynasty. Taking the fetus, he led his disciples to a secluded, sacred cave far from the disturbances of the outside world. In this cave, Vyasa performed an intricate ritual. With great care, he instructed his disciples to divide the fetus into 101 parts. These parts were delicately placed into 101 different earthen pots, each filled with essential life-giving fluids such as amniotic fluid, blood, and placental matter. Vyasa's instructions were precise. The pots were to be kept in a dark place, away from the harsh rays of sunlight, which could interfere with the growth of the fetuses. He emphasized the importance of guarding these pots, as they held the future of the Kuru dynasty within them. Once the process was complete, Vyasa informed Bhishma of the miraculous solution. He explained that Gandhari's boon would soon be fulfilled, and 101 children would be born from these pots, ensuring the continuation of the Kuru lineage. Bhishma, who had been deeply troubled by the uncertainty of the dynasty's future, was greatly relieved. Expressing profound gratitude, he thanked Vyasa for his wisdom and divine intervention in preserving the Kuru dynasty. Pandu, after receiving the news of Gandhari's miraculous pregnancy and Vyasa's intervention to split her single fetus into 101 children, was struck with an intense wave of sorrow and desire. His mind weighed heavy with the thought of his elder brother, Dhritarashtra, having 101 heirs, while he, despite his righteousness, was destined to remain childless. This seemed a cruel twist of fate, especially since Dhritarashtra had often strayed from the path of Dharma, yet was blessed with such prosperity in progeny. Pandu, despite all his virtues and strict adherence to righteousness, found himself left behind in this regard, and he felt it was unfair, an imbalance in the cosmic order. Deeply affected, Pandu went to Kunti once more, urging her to consider the niyoga process with the sages. Kunti, who had long been resistant to this idea, now found herself unable to bear Pandu's sorrow any longer. Reluctantly, she revealed the sacred boon given to her by sage Durvasa, one that could summon any deity to bless her with a child. Just as she was about to explain further about the birth of her firstborn, Pandu, overwhelmed with joy, interrupted her. His joy was so immense that he didn't question why she had kept this secret for so long. He praised her for her fortune and eagerly shared the news with Madri. Though Madri outwardly maintained a facade of joy for Pandu's excitement, her heart was riddled with inner conflict. While she genuinely loved Pandu and respected Kunti, the thought of Kunti bearing children stirred insecurities that Madri could not shake. She feared that Pandu's affection and legacy would be tied more closely to Kunti's children, making her feel secondary in his life. The possibility that she might forever be overshadowed by Kunti's sons gnawed at her. This fear deepened her sense of isolation as she imagined a future where Kunti, as the mother of Pandu's children, would hold more importance, leaving Madri dependent on Kunti's goodwill. These insecurities haunted her, but she buried them deep within, determined not to let Pandu or Kunti sense the turmoil in her heart. Though Madri wished for happiness, a part of her was weighed down by the fear of becoming irrelevant in her husband's life. Pandu's eagerness to use the boon bestowed upon Kunti stemmed from a strategic and profound vision for Hastinapura's future. He realized that by invoking the boon for an instant conception, Sodyo Garbam, the child could be born without the usual 9-month waiting period, thus becoming the eldest among the royal heirs. This was crucial because the firstborn child would be seen as the legitimate successor to the throne. Pandu requested Kunti to summon Yama, the god of death, using her divine boon. Kunti was taken aback. The choice seemed unusual, given that Yama was associated with the end of life, not its beginning. Kunti questioned why Pandu, who sought to ensure the continuation of his lineage, would choose the god of death for such a purpose. Pandu explained that he was asking to invoke Yama for a very specific reason. Yama was revered for his unwavering commitment to Dharma, the eternal law of righteousness. As the embodiment of justice and impartiality, Yama would ensure that the child born from him would be a paragon of virtue, someone who could distinguish right from wrong without bias. A son of Yama would naturally possess qualities of fairness, ethical leadership, and moral strength, traits vital for the future king of Hastinapura. Kunti, understanding Pandu's reasoning, took a deep breath and ascended a nearby hill with determination. She stood in the open, her mind focused, and invoked the sacred mantra given to her by Vyasa. As she chanted the mantra in her mind, the skies darkened and a strange stillness took over the air. The atmosphere thickened, charged with divine energy. After a sudden flash of golden lightning, Lord Yama appeared before Kunti, acknowledging her call. Through their divine union, she was blessed with a son instantly through Satyagarbam. As his purpose on earth was fulfilled, Yama disappeared into the heavens, leaving Kunti standing in awe, carrying the divine child with her. Kunti descended the hill, cradling the newborn son in her arms, and made her way back to the kutir. She presented the child to Pandu and Madri, who were eagerly awaiting her return. The moment Pandu laid eyes on his son, his firstborn, the long-awaited heir to the throne, his heart swelled with joy. His face, which had long been burdened by the weight of his fate, now lit up with a brightness that had not been seen in years. Madri, standing beside Pandu, was equally moved by the sight of the child. Though her heart carried its own yearnings, she shared in the joy of the moment, recognizing the miracle that had blessed their family. Word of the miraculous birth quickly spread throughout the ashram. The sages came to witness the child who had been born of Yama himself. They gathered around the newborn, their eyes filled with reverence and awe, knowing that this child was no ordinary mortal. As they examined the boy, they could feel the powerful aura surrounding him, a clear sign of his divine origin. The sages named him Yudhisthira, derived from two Sanskrit words, yud, meaning war, and sthira, meaning steady or firm. Therefore, the name Yudhisthira translates to the one who is steady in battle, or the one who is steadfast in war. Pandu, overwhelmed with happiness, sent the news of his son's birth to Hastinapura with the same messenger who had earlier brought word of Gandhari giving birth to a fetus. The kingdom was soon to know of the arrival of the one who would be known as the steady warrior, destined to rule and carry forward the Kuru lineage. When Yudhishthira was born, an inexplicable sense of peace spread throughout the Shatashringa region. Not only Pandu and Kunti, but even Madri and the sages residing in the ashram felt an unfamiliar joy settle within them. It was a happiness they could not explain, a lightness that filled the air. Most of them didn't even notice the subtle change, but the feeling was undeniably present. The animals in the mountains, too, wandered with a newfound calm, and nature itself seemed to glow with a radiance, as if the very earth was responding to the birth of this divine child. Bhishma, though separated by great distance, felt the wave of serenity. Discussing with Kripacharya, he spoke of this strange happiness. Kripacharya, feeling a similar sense of peace, speculated that it could be due to the imminent birth of Dhritarashtra's 100 sons. Yet Bhishma was unsure, noting that this joy was different. After so many years, his heart felt light in a way that words could not convey. The feeling was not his alone. Even Satyavati, Ambika, and Ambalika sensed this inexplicable contentment, as if the very atmosphere had shifted. Dhritarashtra and Shakuni also reveled in this unknown joy, though they attributed it to the nearing birth of Dhritarashtra's long-awaited sons. Shakuni, always calculating, remarked that Pandu would be overcome with sorrow when he heard the news, reminded of his inability to father children due to the curse placed upon him. But, lost in his happiness, Dhritarashtra brushed aside Shakuni's words, saying that Pandu was his brother, and regardless of his personal feelings, he would be happy to hear the news of the birth of the kingdom's heir. At that moment, the messenger returned from Shatashringa. Shakuni eagerly inquired about Pandu's reaction upon hearing the news of Dhritarashtra's sons. The messenger, with a hesitant tone, revealed that Pandu had appeared tense, but soon shared joyous news of his own, the birth of Yudhisthira. Dhritarashtra and Shakuni were stunned. A deep silence fell over the room. Shakuni's face darkened with disbelief, while Dhritarashtra, though momentarily shocked, quickly found happiness for his brother. He knew how deeply the curse had wounded Pandu, and now, knowing that Pandu had been blessed with a son, Dhritarashtra shared in his joy, despite Shakuni's simmering anger. Unable to contain his frustration, Shakuni scolded the messenger, insisting it was impossible for Pandu to father children. But the messenger, composed, explained what had transpired, recounting how the child was born through the divine intervention of Lord Yama, and the child born through the sacred process of Sodyogarbham. Shakuni expected this news to upset Dhritarashtra, but to his dismay, Dhritarashtra remained joyful. Shakuni, seething with displeasure, subtly provoked Dhritarashtra, saying that while Dhritarashtra's sons might be warriors, Yudhishthira would be the king. He hinted that Dhritarashtra's 100 sons would serve Yudhishthira like mere soldiers, fetching his weapons, polishing his armor, and cleaning his footwear. Dhritarashtra, now agitated, warned Shakuni to stop, but Shakuni, ever persistent, continued, saying that if Yudhishthira became king, Dhritarashtra's sons, no matter how many, would have no choice but to obey him. The seeds of doubt planted, Dhritarashtra began to waver. Shakuni's words struck at his deepest insecurities, causing him to question the future of his lineage. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Gandhari received the news of Yudhishthira's birth. Unbidden tears filled her eyes. Though she had conceived before Kunti, it was Kunti who had given birth to a son first, securing the true heir to the throne. Gandhari felt a deep sorrow, believing she had failed to give Dhritarashtra his rightful king. What had once been certain, the unanimous acknowledgement of Dhritarashtra's son as the prince and future king, was now in question due to her delayed delivery. The weight of this realization overwhelmed her, and when Dhritarashtra came to her in anger, she could only ask for forgiveness, accepting the blame for what she perceived as her failure. Before Dhritarashtra could respond, Shakuni interceded, surprising both Gandhari and Dhritarashtra. In a tone that was both polite and cunning, Shakuni claimed that the fault did not lie with Gandhari, but with Dhritarashtra. Shocked, Dhritarashtra demanded an explanation. Shakuni calmly stated that Gandhari had fulfilled her duties. Through years of tapas, she had earned the boon of 100 sons, carrying them with great difficulty. But it was Dhritarashtra who was now placing his sons in a position where they would be no more than common soldiers under Yudhishthira's command. Shakuni's words struck deep into Dhritarashtra's mind, forcing him to consider the future of his sons. Shakuni then slyly suggested that it was within Dhritarashtra's power to decide whether his sons would be rulers or slaves, depending on how he acted in the coming days. Dhritarashtra, filled with uncertainty and fear, began to realize the importance of his decisions for his children's future. When the news reached Bhishma and Vidura, they felt a lingering sense of joy. Bhishma, now understanding the reason for his earlier unknown happiness, was filled with even greater contentment at the birth of Yudhishthira than he had been at the news of Dhritarashtra's 100 sons. Kripacharya, too, noticed this shift and explained to Bhishma that when a great soul is born, all living beings unconsciously feel the impact of happiness within their hearts. He said this was the reason for the inexplicable joy that had spread across the land when Yudhishthira was born. A few days later, strange and ominous events began to unfold. Vidura, standing atop the palace, was alarmed to see flocks of owls descending upon the palace from all directions, an unsettling sight. Simultaneously, donkeys across the kingdom began braying loudly, their cries unceasing for hours. Dark clouds covered the sky, casting a shadow over the kingdom even during the day, and a sudden rain of blood droplets terrified the people. Fearing some demonic act, they rushed into their homes. Bhishma, disturbed by these signs, consulted Kripacharya, who, with his deep knowledge, revealed the grim truth. These were signs of Kali's elements manifesting in human form. Vidura and Bhishma were shocked, and Kripacharya continued, explaining that when someone born with Kali's influence enters the world, nature responds with ominous warnings, signaling the coming of a destructive force that could bring immense loss, not only to the kingdom, but to all of mankind. At that very moment, a messenger from Vyasa arrived at the palace, announcing the birth of Dhritarashtra's first son. Bhishma, Kripacharya, and Vidura immediately understood that this child was the one born under the influence of Kali. Dhritarashtra, consumed with joy, prepared to leave for the caves where the child was born. After years of longing, the birth of his son had brought hope to his troubled heart, and he could not wait to embrace the child he had yearned for. However, Bhishma intervened, urging him to stay, for there were matters of grave importance that required immediate attention. Reluctantly, Dhritarashtra halted, though every fiber of his being longed to see the child. As the council convened, the air in the chamber was thick with unease, the gravity of the matter weighing heavily on every soul present. Kripacharya, his voice low and laced with sorrow, broke the silence with the pronouncement that stunned the assembly that Dhritarashtra's firstborn son must be sacrificed. His words fell like a thunderbolt, leaving both Dhritarashtra and Shakuni astonished. A profound silence followed, the enormity of the statement slowly settling over the room. Dhritarashtra sat motionless, his heart sinking into despair. The joy he had felt moments ago was crushed under the weight of this cruel decree. With a voice trembling from shock and sorrow, he questioned the necessity of such an action. Kripacharya, his expression grim, explained the dire portents: the unsettling descent of countless owls upon the palace, the persistent braying of donkeys that echoed across the kingdom, and the ominous darkness that veiled the skies even during the day. These were not mere coincidences, but warnings from nature itself, foretelling the presence of a destructive force. The child, born under the influence of Kali's element, posed a grave threat, and his sacrifice was essential to safeguard the kingdom from future ruin. Dhritarashtra, overwhelmed by grief, sank deeper into his chair, his mind spiraling into despair. His voice, heavy with anguish, lamented how life had been a succession of relentless hardships since his birth. Every time happiness seemed within reach, it was cruelly snatched away, leaving him with sorrow once more. The burden of this new sorrow weighed on him unbearably. Sensing the gravity of the moment, Shakuni, ever sharp-tongued and defiant, intervened. With mockery laced in his words, he challenged Kripacharya's proposal. To him, sacrificing a newborn child was nothing short of an act of barbarity. He asked scornfully that how could such brutality ever be justified? He blamed only beings of demonic nature engage in such heartless rituals. His words dripped with sarcasm as he accused Kripacharya of following dark, forbidden practices, attempting to undermine the sage's wisdom. Vidura, ever the voice of reason, stepped in before Shakuni's defiance could escalate further. In a calm and measured tone, he reminded Dhritarashtra that 99 more sons were yet to be born to him. The loss of one, while painful, would not diminish his legacy. But the consequences of keeping the child within the kingdom could be disastrous. Vidura's words were spoken with a wisdom rooted in concern for the greater good of the realm. Yet, despite the council's collective wisdom, Dhritarashtra's heart could not reconcile with the idea of sacrificing his firstborn. The mere thought of extinguishing the life of an innocent child who had only just arrived into the world filled him with sorrow. His love as a father was too strong, overpowering the rational arguments presented to him. Sensing Dhritarashtra's turmoil, Shakuni leaned in once more, his voice smooth and persuasive. With subtle cunning, he reminded his brother-in-law of his stature as king. A ruler, Shakuni whispered, need not shed tears for what he can control. He urged Dhritarashtra to assert his authority, to issue a decree that no harm would come to his son. The fate of the kingdom, he implied, rested on Dhritarashtra's strength of will, not on the grim warnings of omens. Emboldened by Shakuni's words, Dhritarashtra straightened in his seat. His sorrow, though still present, was now tempered by a renewed sense of command. With a voice filled with regal authority, he declared that as king, he would not sanction the sacrifice of his child. His son would live, and no harm would befall him. He ordered the council to abide by his decision, making it clear that this matter was closed, and the child would remain under the protection of the crown. Kripacharya and Vidura exchanged brief glances, their faces etched with concern. Knowing the dangers that loomed, they turned toward Bhishma, seeking his final word. Bhishma, the venerable patriarch, sat in solemn contemplation. Though he knew that the child's presence could bring misfortune to the kingdom, his heart could not endorse the cruel fate proposed for an innocent life. The thought of condemning a newborn to death weighed too heavily on his soul. After a long pause, Bhishma slowly inclined his head toward Kripacharya and Vidura. signaling his reluctant acceptance of the king's decision. His nod was a gesture not of agreement, but of submission to Dhritarashtra's authority, acknowledging that the will of the monarch must prevail. With the meeting concluded, the council dispersed, leaving behind an air of uncertainty. Though the immediate crisis had been averted, a sense of foreboding lingered. The decision to spare the child had been made, but the shadow of his birth, marked by Kali's element, still hung over the kingdom. Dhritarashtra went to the caves and gently took his firstborn into his arms. A deep sadness filled his heart as he realized he would never be able to see his son with his own eyes. Hugging the baby tightly, tears flowed from his eyes. At that moment, he felt a glimmer of hope. This child, he believed, would achieve all that Dhritarashtra could not because of his blindness. He would overcome every insecurity and fulfill the dreams that Dhritarashtra had been denied. The child was named Duryodhana, a name formed from two Sanskrit words, Dur meaning difficult, and Yodhana meaning warrior or fighter. Thus, Duryodhana's name reflected the meaning of a difficult or formidable warrior. Dhritarashtra felt the name was fitting, for he believed his son would grow into a fighter who could overcome all odds and rise above the challenges that life would throw at him. As Dhritarashtra held his son close, a harsh realization gripped him. Even before the boy's birth, politics had already conspired to end his life on the very day he was born, and these schemes would not stop until the child ascended the throne. With this realization, Dhritarashtra made a firm decision. He would protect Duryodhana at any cost, no matter what it took or whom he had to sacrifice. His son's safety and future were now his highest priority. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Dhritarashtra was determined that Duryodhana would survive, thrive, and one day take his rightful place on the throne. Pandu's heart brimmed with joy as he spent his days playing with his newborn son, Yudhisthira. It had been years since such happiness had touched his life, and with each passing moment, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His once troubled spirit, long burdened by regret and sorrow, was now uplifted by the presence of the child in his arms. His laughter echoed through the forest as he delighted in every moment with Yudhisthira, feeling as though all his worries had melted away. Meanwhile, Kunti, though joyful for Pandu, found herself weighed down by inner turmoil. The secret of her firstborn, Karna, tugged at her heart. Should she reveal the truth about the child she had borne before her marriage to Pandu? She could feel the immense happiness radiating from her husband, happiness she hadn't seen in years. The thought of disrupting his newfound joy haunted her. Unable to bear the possibility of shattering his peace, she decided to bury the truth deep within her heart, keeping the secret of her firstborn to herself. Madri, too, carried her own silent burdens. Seeing Kunti with a child stirred feelings of insecurity within her. Though she longed to experience the same joy of motherhood, she hid her emotions behind a veil of kindness. She treated Yudhishthira with affection, masking her inner conflict with smiles and tender gestures. Outwardly, she embraced her role in the growing family, but inwardly, she grappled with the fear of being left behind. As Pandu basked in the joy of fatherhood, a thought gnawed at the edges of his mind. He knew that his brother, Dhritarashtra, would soon have 100 sons, And though Yudhishthira was now his firstborn, he wondered if it would be enough. His heart stirred with unease. He visited the sages in the ashram, seeking their wisdom, and shared his thoughts with them. If Dhritarashtra was to have 100 sons, what did it mean for Yudhishthira? Could one child stand strong amidst a sea of brothers who might either support or turn against him? The sages listened to Pandu's concerns and offered their counsel. If he wished to secure Yudhishthira's future, they advised, he needed a son who could match the strength of Dhritarashtra's 100 heirs combined. A son so powerful that he could protect Yudhishthira and ensure his place as a rightful leader. The words of the sages resonated deeply with Pandu, stirring him to reflect on what was required for his son's future. He pondered the nature of kingship and power. Yudhishthira, as the firstborn, will embody righteousness, patience, and peace, qualities essential for a just ruler. Yet, Pandu knew that such virtues alone would not be enough to maintain power in a world filled with intrigue and conflict. Even among his 100 cousins, Yudhishthira could not assume loyalty. Some might stand by him, but others could very well oppose him. It was clear to Pandu that his son would need more than just virtues. He would need strength by his side, a brother with unmatched power, capable of handling any threat or challenge that might arise. With these thoughts weighing heavily on his mind, Pandu contemplated which divine power could grant him such a son. He needed a deity whose strength was unparalleled, a force of nature that could never be contained. As he sifted through the pantheon of gods in his thoughts, his mind settled on the one he believed to be the most powerful. Vasudeva, the god of the wind. Vasudeva is one of the most powerful forces of nature, an unstoppable and invisible entity that governs the very breath of life and the stormy wrath of the skies. Vayu's presence can be gentle, a soft breeze that cools the earth and carries the fragrance of flowers. Yet, when provoked, his power is unmatched, transforming into a raging tempest that can uproot trees, topple mountains, and sweep entire cities into ruin. In a flash, Vayu can reduce thriving forests to mere memories, flattening all in his path. His destructive force, carried by hurricanes, tornadoes, and storms, brings both chaos and awe, a reminder that the wind holds the power of both creation and devastation in its hands. With clarity in his heart and a resolute purpose, Pandu sought out Kunti, eager to share his thoughts. He expressed to her the realization that while righteousness and virtue were essential traits of a king, it was valor that earned a ruler the respect of both allies and enemies. Yudhishthira, with his deep sense of justice, will embody the qualities of patience and peace. Yet these alone were not enough to command the loyalty of men or to confront the challenges of leadership. A ruler must be revered for his strength, and for this reason, Pandu gently requested Kunti to use her divine boon once more, a call upon Vasudeva, the god of wind, to bless them with a son who would possess unmatched power. Kunti listened to her husband's words, and though a deep hesitation stirred within her, she knew she could not refuse his request. The thought of bearing children through divine unions, though sacred, filled her with unease. Yet, the sight of the happiness Pandu now carried, happiness she had not seen in years, moved her heart. She resolved to honor his request, for the good of her family and to ensure Yudhisthira would have the brotherly strength needed to face the trials of the future. After performing the necessary purification rites, Kunti immersed herself in the sacred waters of a nearby lake. The cold waters cleansed her mind and body, preparing her for the divine encounter. She ascended the same mountain peak where she had previously invoked Yama. Standing atop the summit, with the sky stretched endlessly above her, she closed her eyes and began to chant the powerful mantra given to her by the sage Vyasa. The moment her words filled the air, the winds began to howl, as if summoned from the farthest corners of the world. The skies darkened, and clouds gathered swiftly overhead. The air around her thickened with divine energy, and from within the swirling storm descended Vasudeva. His presence was both serene and powerful, like the breath of a storm held still for a fleeting moment. Without words, Kunti and Vasudeva came together in sacred union, bound by destiny and purpose. The process of conception, which would typically span months, was completed in mere moments through the divine grace of Satyavati, the instant birth. In the blink of an eye, the formation of the child within Kunti's womb reached completion. With a sudden, sharp pang, the child entered the world, born of wind and strength. Kunti cradled her newborn son in her arms, marveling at his weight. Though an infant, he was extraordinarily heavy, as if the very essence of Vayu's power had been imbued into his being. His presence was overwhelming, and Kunti could feel the raw energy that radiated from the boy. Pandu, upon seeing his second son, his heart swelled with even greater joy. The sight of the child, born through divine grace and destined for greatness, filled him with hope. The sages, drawn by the divine vibrations that accompanied the boy's birth, came to see the newborn. As they examined him, a sense of goodness and strength emanated from the child, filling them with an unspoken reassurance. After conferring among themselves, the sages decided upon a name for the boy, Vrikodara. This name was derived from two Sanskrit words, Vrika, meaning wolf, and Udara, meaning belly or stomach. The name, meaning the one with the belly of a wolf, was given to him because the child's stomach, slightly concave and firm, resembled the lean, powerful belly of a wolf. Pandu, filled with gratitude and joy, embraced both his sons, knowing that destiny was unfolding as it should. With Vrikodara at Yudhishthira's side, the future seemed brighter, and the challenges ahead, though inevitable, now felt surmountable. On the third day following Vrikodara's birth, a messenger arrived from Hastinapura carrying important news. Pandu was eager to hear the latest from the capital. The messenger revealed that Dhritarashtra's firstborn son had entered the world and was named Duryodhana. Pandu realized that Duryodhana and Vrikodara had been born on the same day, but Duryodhana's birth had occurred first. Though it seemed a small difference, Pandu knew that this subtle order carried immense significance, hinting at the power struggles that might arise within the Kuru dynasty. The messenger then informed Pandu that during his journey from Hastinapura, 2 more sons had likely been born to Dhritarashtra. Sage Veda Vyasa had foretold that Gandhari's sons would emerge from the pots gradually, likely 1 or more each day, and that the entire process would take approximately 100 days to yield all 100 children. Before departing, the messenger presented Pandu with a flock of trained pigeons. The messenger explained that these birds would allow Pandu to send messages swiftly to Hastinapura, ensuring that communication with the palace remained uninterrupted. Pandu accepted the pigeons with gratitude, knowing that staying connected with the royal court would be vital in the coming days. With his task complete, the messenger mounted his horse and began the return journey to Hastinapura, carrying with him the news of Vrikodara's birth. As Pandu watched the messenger disappear along the forest path, he knew that the destiny of his sons and Dhritarashtra's children was now intertwined, and the unfolding events would shape the future of the Kuru dynasty in ways no one could yet foresee. In Hastinapura, developments were unfolding in the royal household. Sugadha, Gandhari's maid, who had become pregnant by Dhritarashtra, gave birth to a son. The child was named Yuyutsu, a name derived from two Sanskrit words. Yu, meaning to strive or to seek, and itsu, a suffix indicating desire or intent. Thus, Yuyutsu's name meant one who desires to seek, reflecting a spirit of purpose and ambition. Yuyutsu's birth took place immediately after Duryodhana, making him the second child of Dhritarashtra, but through a different mother. His arrival occurred just before the second son of Gandhari emerged from the pot. Yuyutsu's presence in the royal lineage added a subtle complexity, for although he was born of a maid, he still carried Dhritarashtra's blood and was considered part of the Kuru lineage. Shortly after Yuyutsu's birth, the next child from Gandhari's 100 pots was born. The pot cracked open and a boy emerged, healthy and strong. The sages gathered to bless the newborn, and it was Kripacharya who gave him the name Dushasana. The name was formed from two Sanskrit words, Du, meaning hard to oppose or irreversible, and Shasana, meaning final order or command. Together, Dushasana signified one whose command cannot be opposed, a name that carried the weight of authority and unyielding will. Upon hearing the messenger's words, repeating that each day Dhritarashtra's sons would be born, Pandu's heart stirred with a growing dissatisfaction. Though he had already known that Dhritarashtra was destined to have 100 sons, hearing it again now, spoken aloud, unsettled him deeply. The thought of his brother's lineage expanding day by day ignited a restless yearning within him. Though Pandu was blessed with 2 sons, Yudhishthira, embodying righteousness, and Vrikodara, possessing immense strength, his mind began to drift toward the idea of a 3rd son, one destined to be the greatest warrior in the world. Pandu reflected deeply on the nature of fate, godly blessings, and human deeds. He understood that the world rests upon the interplay of divine will and human effort. It was not enough to rely on the mercy of the gods alone. One must act decisively, recognizing opportunities when they arose and seizing them. The boon granted to Kunti, allowing her to summon gods and receive children through them, was an opportunity Pandu was determined to make the most of. He knew that the favor of the gods would come only to those who took initiative, acted with purpose, and capitalized on the moments fate presented. Devaki's pregnancy was the most anticipated event in terms of both joy and terror. For Devaki and Vasudeva, the child growing in her womb represented hope, a child destined to break the chains of tyranny and restore righteousness. Yet, for Kamsa, the same pregnancy was a looming nightmare, This was the eighth child, foretold by the divine Akashvani, a celestial prophecy, the one destined to end his life. Kamsa, though outwardly fierce and commanding, carried a deep and unrelenting fear within his heart. Beneath the facade of bravado, his mind was plagued by terror, an ever-present fear of Vishnu, whose divine will could manifest in any form. Every shadow, every flicker of movement startled him, as if Vishnu had already arrived to deliver the fatal blow. His paranoia grew with each passing day, tormenting his mind. The mere thought of the unborn child filled him with dread, and he found no solace even in sleep. His thoughts became increasingly dark. He considered committing unspeakable acts, pulling the child from Devaki's womb before it could take its first breath, or even ending Devaki's life entirely, erasing the possibility of his foretold death. Yet it was Asti, his wife, who restrained him. With quiet but firm resolve, she dissuaded Kamsa from committing these horrific acts. Reluctantly, Kamsa abandoned these thoughts, but the fear never left his mind. The child growing within Devaki was no ordinary being. This child was the supreme manifestation of Vishnu, the preserver of the cosmos. Vishnu, the eternal deity who governs the balance of creation and destruction, had chosen to descend into the physical realm. He, who holds control over every universe, every galaxy, every star, and every planet and being, from the vastness of infinity down to the tiniest subatomic particle, and the stillness of nothingness, would take mortal form. The Supreme God, who sustains all that exists, is manifesting as a child in the womb of Devaki. Vishnu's decision to enter the mortal world was not random but purposeful. Throughout time, the divine takes form in moments when Adharma reaches its peak, when no other being, divine or mortal, can restore order. He manifests to prove to humanity, lost in confusion and doubt, that Dharma exists and that the divine is real, even though unseen. Humans, forever trapped in the uncertainty of faith, question whether God truly exists. Vishnu's incarnations serve to guide these wandering minds, to show through his actions that divinity walks among them. In every age, he lives among the people, facing trials and tribulations just as they do, setting examples of how to think, act, and endure. By undergoing the full range of human experiences, joy, sorrow, struggle, and triumph, he shows how mortals must live, carrying the torch of righteousness through even the darkest of times. Vishnu's descent into the mortal world is not merely to fight evil, but to inspire humanity, to demonstrate that righteousness, no matter how besieged, must prevail. And now, in the Dwapara Yuga, the time for his next descent had arrived. Unrighteousness will spread like wildfire, and tyranny will take hold over the land. Even the most noble beings will be powerless against the rising evil. This was the moment foretold, the moment when Vishnu would multiply from the cosmic realms to become flesh and blood, to walk among humans and restore order. He would arrive not as a mighty deity, but as a vulnerable child, born into the humble prison of Devaki and Vasudeva. Within the confines of that prison, the cosmic preserver prepared to enter the world of men, to live among them, to endure the trials and tribulations of life alongside others, and triumph over the forces of Adharma. His purpose was not just to slay Kamsa, but to serve as a beacon of hope, reminding humanity that even in the darkest moments, the divine stands ready to act. As the time approached for the birth of Devaki's eighth child, the entire palace of Kamsa was placed on high alert. Consumed by fear, Kamsa took every possible measure to prevent the prophecy from coming true. He stationed his most trusted guards at the dungeon gates, ensuring no one could enter or leave unnoticed. The doors to the prison were locked with intricate, impenetrable locks, the keys to which Kamsa kept with himself, unwilling to entrust them to anyone else. Vasudeva was bound tightly in chains, leaving him helpless and isolated. Despite the outward show of vigilance, Kamsa's mind was in turmoil. Fear had taken root deep in his heart, haunting him day and night. But that night, something inexplicable happened. After days of restless vigilance, Kamsa, his heart weighed down by anxiety, was overtaken by a sudden and unnatural drowsiness. For the first time in many nights, he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, oblivious to the events about to unfold. Meanwhile, within the dungeon, Devaki was overcome with labor pains, writhing in agony and with no one to assist her. She cried out in pain, her voice echoing through the cold, dark cell. Vasudeva, witnessing his wife's suffering but helpless to aid her, felt his own strength fail him, and he slipped into unconsciousness, unable to bear the weight of his powerlessness. It was in this moment, between the realms of consciousness and sleep, that Lord Vishnu communicated with Vasudeva from the metaphysical realm. In that formless plane, Vishnu revealed to Vasudeva that the time had come for his divine birth. Vishnu instructed Vasudeva that once the child was born, he must carry the newborn son to Nanda's house in Gaukula. There, Yoga Maya, the goddess of illusion, would be born to Yashoda at the same moment. Vasudeva was to exchange Devaki's son with Yashoda's newborn daughter. The words of the divine resonated deeply within Vasudeva's soul, and with sudden clarity, he awoke. As Vasudeva opened his eyes, he found Devaki lying unconscious, her ordeal complete, with a radiant child resting beside her. The infant, untouched by the turmoil of the world, had a nimbostratus skin tone, smooth and glowing like the twilight sky. His hair was dark and curly, framing his serene face, and a gentle, divine smile graced his lips. Despite the darkness of the dungeon, the child's presence seemed to fill the space with a quiet, unearthly beauty. To Vasudeva's amazement, the chains that had bound him fell away, clattering uselessly to the ground. The locks on the prison doors clicked open of their own accord, as if some invisible force had willed it. Vasudeva knelt beside Devaki, gently holding the child in his hands, his heart overwhelmed by a mix of reverence and joy. Though many offer cows as gifts and charity when blessed with a child, Vasudeva, trapped in the prison, could offer nothing tangible. In his heart, he imagined performing a sacred bath for the child and offering 10,000 cows in donation. He silently vowed that, once free, he would fulfill these acts of gratitude. Clutching the divine infant close to his chest, Vasudeva glanced outside the cell. The guards stationed along the corridors were all in a deep, unnatural sleep. With a heart pounding in both awe and fear, Vasudeva stepped out of the dungeon. The silent halls echoed with his hurried footsteps as he carried the child in a basket. Not a single guard stirred. With each step, Vasudeva marveled at the unfolding Vishnu Maya, the divine illusion ensuring their escape. When Vasudeva emerged from the palace gates, The sky above was filled with dense, dark clouds, casting a heavy gloom over the night. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and a gentle rain began to fall. Placing his son inside the basket, Vasudeva set it upon his head and made his way toward the Yamuna river, which lay between him and Nanda's house in Gaukula. As the rain intensified, a massive serpent, Shesha, emerged from the shadows and slithered beside Vasudeva. Coiling above the basket, Shesha spread his great hood like a canopy, shielding the infant from the pouring rain. Vasudeva, witnessing the divine serpent's presence, was filled with wonder, knowing it was yet another manifestation of Vishnu's grace. When Vasudeva reached the banks of the Yamuna, he was confronted by a fierce current. The river, swollen from the rains, surged violently, threatening to sweep away anyone who dared to cross. Yet Vasudeva knew he had no choice. Trusting in Vishnu's divine will, he whispered the god's name in his heart and stepped into the river. The waters roared around him, rising higher with each step. As he waded deeper, the icy current reached his waist, then his chest. He pressed forward, struggling against the force of the water, until the river reached his neck. Just as Vasudeva feared he might be overcome, the infant's foot grazed the surface of the water. In that instant, the Yamuna stilled. The violent current ceased, and the waters parted on either side, creating a clear path for Vasudeva to walk through. Awestruck by the sight, Vasudeva stood still for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the miracle. He knew without a doubt that this was the divine hand of Vishnu guiding him. Crossing the dry riverbed, Vasudeva continued his journey to Nanda's house in Gaukula. Upon reaching the humble home, Vasudeva found Nanda, startled by his unexpected arrival. Nanda, confused and amazed that Vasudeva had escaped from prison, listened carefully as Vasudeva recounted the divine instructions given by Vishnu in his vision. Vasudeva explained that the infant son in his arms was the incarnation of Vishnu, and that he had come to exchange him with Yashoda's newborn daughter. Nanda, hearing that his daughter would be taken to the palace and subjected to Kamsa's cruelty, was overcome with sorrow. His eyes brimmed with tears as he held the tiny girl, knowing that she had been born after many years of prayer and longing. Yet, recognizing the divine will at work, Nanda reluctantly agreed to the exchange. His heart heavy, he gently lifted the newborn daughter from her cradle, while Yashoda remained in deep sleep, unaware of the momentous events unfolding around her. With a heart full of sorrow but faith in the divine plan, Nanda placed his daughter in Vasudeva's hands. Vasudeva, seeing the grief in Nanda's eyes, reassured him softly. He told Nanda that the boy he had brought was now his son, his very own, and urged him to raise the child with love and care. Nanda nodded, wiping away his tears, and laid the divine infant gently on the bed beside Yashoda, his heart filling with a strange peace, as if blessed by Vishnu himself. Cradling Nanda's daughter in his arms, Vasudeva made his way back toward the prison, carrying out the divine exchange exactly as instructed. With each step, he marveled at the unfolding of Vishnu Maya, knowing that the Supreme God himself had orchestrated every event, guiding him through the impossible, ensuring that destiny was set on its rightful course. Vasudeva returned to the prison under the veil of night, carrying Nanda's newborn daughter. As he entered the cold, dimly lit cell, the gates of the prison closed behind him with a soft click, locking themselves as though nothing had happened. The guards remained in their deep slumber, unaware of the divine exchange that had taken place. Vasudeva gently laid the baby girl beside Devaki, who was still unconscious from the exhaustion of childbirth. After some time, Devaki stirred, slowly waking from her unconscious state. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw the infant girl lying next to her. A wave of confusion washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by a deep fear. She understood at once that this child was a girl, her daughter. Panic gripped her heart, knowing that Kamsa would come for the child, believing it to be the 8th child foretold by the prophecy. In despair, she clutched the baby tightly to her chest, tears welling in her eyes as fear consumed her. The child's cries soon echoed through the silent dungeon, awakening the guards. Hearing the baby's wails, they rushed to inform Kamsa. Startled from his deep, unnatural sleep, Kamsa's fear flared within him. He grabbed his sword without hesitation and stormed toward the prison, convinced that the prophecy was unfolding before his eyes. When Kamsa reached the prison cell, he found Devaki huddled in the corner, cradling the infant girl close to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. The sight of her brother entering the cell with a sword in hand sent waves of panic through her. Tears streamed down her face as she begged for mercy, her voice trembling with sorrow. Every fiber of her being begged for mercy, knowing the futility of it. She pleaded with Kamsa, hoping that the sight of a helpless baby girl might stir some sliver of compassion within him. She reminded him that this was no son, no threat to his life, just a newborn daughter. A woman could never pose a danger to a warrior as powerful as Kamsa. Her heart ached as she recalled the 6 sons he had already slain, their innocent lives cruelly taken in his madness. The memory of the 7th, lost in miscarriage, only deepened her sorrow. She wondered what honor could there be in killing a defenseless infant, especially a girl. But as she held the child tighter, praying for even a trace of humanity in Kamsa, she knew that her hopes were fragile against the stone-cold certainty of his fear. Her pleas, filled with grief and desperation, echoed through the prison. But Kamsa, consumed by fear and blinded by his obsession with survival, remained unmoved. The sight of the infant girl did not soften his heart. Without a word, he reached forward and tore the child from Devaki's arms. Devaki cried out in despair, her heart breaking as she saw Kamsa hold the child high in the air. With cold determination, Kamsa tossed the infant upward, intending to slice her with his sword midair. But as the child ascended, something miraculous occurred. The baby did not fall back into Kamsa's hands. Instead, she transformed in midair, her body radiating divine light. In an instant, the newborn girl revealed herself as Yoga Maya, the goddess of illusion. Hovering above Kamsa, she spoke in a voice that resonated with unearthly power. Her voice carried the weight of divine judgment, exposing Kamsa's cruelty. She revealed the horror of his actions. 6 innocent children killed in fear, their heads smashed against the walls of his palace. His terror had driven him to even attempt the murder of this helpless baby girl, blinded by his obsession to escape his fate. But his efforts had been in vain. The child he feared, destined to bring his downfall, was already beyond his reach, safely taken to a place where Kamsa could not harm him. There was no escaping the prophecy. Devaki's 8th son would return, and when he did, Kamsa's death would be inevitable. This information struck Kamsa like a blow, leaving him kneeling in despair. Everything he had done to avoid this moment had been for nothing. His fear and wickedness had not saved him, but had only brought him closer to the doom he had tried so desperately to avoid. With those words, Yogamaya's radiant form vanished into the ether, leaving Kamsa standing paralyzed in disbelief. His sword slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground. He fell to his knees, his heart sinking under the weight of her words. Everything he had done, the countless murders, the ruthless actions, had been in vain. His mind spiraled into despair, realizing that despite his efforts, the prophecy would come true. The child destined to kill him was alive, somewhere beyond his grasp, and his death was inevitable. Devaki, too, was overwhelmed by the revelation. For years, her heart had been burdened with unspeakable grief, weighed down by the loss of her children and the fear of endless suffering. But now, with Yogamaya's words, that weight was lifted. A profound sense of relief washed over her, and a spark of joy flickered within her heart. Her eighth son, the child she and Vasudeva had waited for, was alive, and his destiny was to bring an end to Kamsa's tyranny. In that moment, Devaki and Vasudeva felt a surge of hope unlike any they had known in years. The future they had longed for, the one in which their son would fulfill the prophecy and free them from their imprisonment, now seemed within reach. Though they remained confined within the walls of the prison, their spirits soared with newfound faith. They knew with certainty that the day would come when their son would return to Mathura, confront Kamsa, and restore righteousness to the land. For the first time in years, Devaki and Vasudeva dared to dream of freedom, knowing that the divine plan was already in motion, and that nothing, not even Kamsa's fear, could stop what was destined to unfold. On the 10th day after Vrikodara's birth, Kunti took him to a tranquil waterfall to bathe, while Madri stayed behind, tending to Yudhisthira. As Kunti submerged herself in the cool flowing waters, Madri carefully looked after both children. Once Kunti returned, it was Madri's turn to bathe. But before leaving, Madri warned Kunti in a low, anxious voice that they should leave the area soon, as she had heard the roar of a wild animal, likely a tiger. Fear crept into Kunti's heart, as the thought of lurking danger unsettled her. After Madri finished her bath, she carried Yudhishthira in her arms while Kunti cradled Vrikodara close. As they walked cautiously through the forest, their thoughts clouded by the earlier warning, a sudden roar shattered the stillness. From the mouth of a hidden cave, a massive tiger leapt out, its golden eyes burning with fury. The beast's roar echoed through the hills, striking terror into their hearts. Kunti, startled by the sheer size and ferocity of the tiger, let out a terrified scream. In her panic, she lost her grip on Vrikodara, and the infant slipped from her arms. Helplessly, she watched in horror as her son tumbled down a steep slope, disappearing into the depths below. Madri, paralyzed with shock, instinctively clutched Yudhishthira closer to her chest and ran as fast as her feet could carry her, leaving Kunti behind with the approaching predator. Kunti, overwhelmed with fear, recovered from her shock and immediately began to run down the slope toward Vrikodara. Her only thought was to reach her fallen son. But her frantic movements triggered the tiger's predatory instincts, and it gave chase, roaring as it pursued her down the hill. The beast's powerful strides brought it dangerously close to Kunti, its claws ready to tear into her. Nearby, Pandu heard Kunti's terrified scream cutting through the forest. Instantly alert, he grabbed his bow and a quiver of arrows and raced toward the direction of the cries. As he reached the scene, he saw the tiger charging at Kunti, just a heartbeat away from leaping upon her. In one swift motion, Pandu drew his bow and loosed 3 arrows with precise force. The arrows struck the tiger mid-leap, and the mighty beast crashed to the ground, writhing and roaring in pain. Kunti, breathless and shaken, stood frozen as Pandu rushed toward her. Her heart still pounding, she managed to tell him that Vrikodara had slipped from her grasp and fallen down the hill. Hearing this, Pandu's heart sank. The thought of his infant son plummeting from such a height filled him with dread. He feared the worst, that his powerful second son had perished upon impact, leaving Yudhisthira alone once more. A deep sadness settled over him, and he braced himself for the possibility of finding Vrikodara lifeless on the rocky ground below. With heavy hearts, Pandu and Kunti began their search for the fallen infant, scrambling down the hill. Their minds raced with fear, but they pressed on, determined to find him. As they reached the base of the hill, what they saw left them both stunned. There, beside a shattered boulder, lay Vrikodara. The massive rock, strong and solid, was broken into countless pieces, as if it had been struck by a powerful force. And there, amidst the debris, lay Vrikodara, his tiny form untouched, his face aglow with a pleasant smile, as though nothing in the world could trouble him. For a moment, Kunti and Pandu stood in disbelief, trying to comprehend what their eyes were witnessing. The infant they thought had perished in the fall was not only alive but unharmed, his serene expression undisturbed by the ordeal. The very rock that had broken beneath his fall lay in fragments around him, as if his tiny body carried a force far beyond human comprehension. Kunti's heart overflowed with joy. Relief washed over her, erasing the fear and guilt that had gripped her moments before. She knelt beside her son, cradling him with tears of happiness in her eyes. Pandu, too, felt a sadness dissolve into pride. His heart swelled with admiration for the incredible power his young son possessed. Even as a mere infant, Vrikodara had displayed a strength that defied all logic. Strength worthy of a warrior destined for greatness. At that moment, both parents realized that Vrikodara was no ordinary child. His strength was a gift, a sign of the divine favor that rested upon him. With hearts full of gratitude and pride, Kunti and Pandu embraced their son, knowing that this powerful boy would one day grow to become an unstoppable force, a protector not only of his family, but of the Kuru lineage and beyond. In the aftermath of the incident at the waterfall, Pandu's desire to have another son intensified. When he believed that Vrikodara had died after falling from the hill, he was overwhelmed with grief. At that moment, he felt that his eldest son, Yudhishthira, was once again left isolated, devoid of a brother's companionship. To prevent such misfortunes from occurring in the future, Pandu resolved to have another son. With this conviction, Pandu resolved to invoke the greatest of all gods, Indra, the king of the Devas and master of the Pancha Mahabhutas, the five great elements, Agni, the god of fire, Varuna, the god of water, Vayu, the god of wind, Udivi, the goddess of earth, and the eternal space, Akasha. Indra, who commanded these forces, was the most powerful king of all deities. If a son were born with the blessings of Indra, he would surely be destined to become the greatest warrior in the world. Warrior capable of shaping the destiny of the Kuru lineage. But Pandu knew that simply invoking Indra through the boon would not be enough. He needed to ensure that the son born through this divine blessing possessed every quality necessary to rise above all others. Seeking guidance, Pandu consulted with the sages residing in the ashram. The sages listened carefully to his thoughts and, after deliberation, advised a path that would not only earn Indra's favor, but ensure that the blessing was bestowed with the fullest potency. They recommended that Kunti undertake a vratha, a sacred vow for an entire year, while Pandu would perform tapasya to summon Indra himself to the mortal realm and secure his assurance. This was no ordinary penance. The sages instructed Pandu to stand on one leg every day from sunrise to sunset, his body still and his mind focused solely on Indradeva. The tapasya was designed to invoke the deity's presence and demonstrate Pandu's unwavering devotion. Kunti, though aware of the challenges ahead, accepted the vratha with determination. She purified herself and began the year-long vow, adhering strictly to the rituals and austerities prescribed by the sages. Every day, she offered prayers, fasted, and performed sacred rituals to align her mind and spirit with the divine. Her focus never wavered, for she knew the importance of this endeavor for her family, for her husband, and for the future of the Kuru dynasty. Meanwhile, Pandu began his own penance. With unshakable resolve, he stood each day on a single leg, his body enduring the burning sun and the biting winds. From dawn until dusk, he remained unmoving, offering his tapasya to Indra. His thoughts were focused only on summoning the god to earth, his spirit unwavering despite the physical toll. Days stretched into weeks, and weeks into months, yet Pandu persisted. His penance was so intense that the animals of the forest grew accustomed to the sight of him standing like a tree, still and serene amidst the elements. Under the watchful guidance of the sages, both Kunti and Pandu remained steadfast in their respective vows. Each day brought them closer to their goal. The forest itself seemed to acknowledge their efforts. The winds blew gently as if in reverence, and the skies remained clear as though waiting for the arrival of the great deity. The intensity of their devotion reached such heights that it was said the heavens themselves began to tremble. Sensing the pull of Pandu's unyielding resolve and Kunti's unwavering faith, the sages reassured Pandu that his efforts would not be in vain. Indra, known for his pride but also for his sense of justice, would not ignore such a profound act of devotion. If Pandu's tapasya was strong enough, the god himself would descend to earth, and with his arrival, Pandu could seek the divine assurance that his third son would be the mightiest warrior the world had ever known. In the distant halls of Gandhara, events unfolded within the personal life of Shakuni, the wily prince of Gandhara. Shakuni had recently married Arshi, the princess of the Goavrani kingdom, solidifying a political alliance through this union. Their marriage bore fruit, and soon the couple welcomed their firstborn son. Traditionally, royal children were named by the kingdom's revered gurus, who selected names based on celestial alignments and the child's future destiny. Yet, Shakuni, ever defiant of convention, refused the involvement of the royal gurus in this sacred ritual. Instead, he declared that he alone would choose the name of his son. Without hesitation, Shakuni named his child Uluka, a word that translates to owl. The unusual choice of name unsettled many in the court, including the royal gurus and Shakuni's father, Subhala. The name seemed strange, almost inappropriate for a prince of Gandhara. Subhala, in particular, felt displeased with the decision, considering it improper for a future king to bear a name associated with a nocturnal bird. But Shakuni, as always, had his own reasons steeped in wit and veiled sarcasm. Shakuni offered an explanation with his signature cunning. He proclaimed that an owl, though often seen as an omen of ill fortune, was also a creature endowed with qualities that every ruler should possess: sharpness, cunning, and perpetual watchfulness. Shakuni remarked that an owl can see what others cannot, perceiving the hidden truths within darkness. He insisted that these traits were not just desirable, but essential for a prince destined to rule a kingdom like Gandhara, where survival depended on shrewdness and foresight. Subhala and the assembled gurus listened, but Shakuni's tone carried an edge of mockery. With a wry smile, Shakuni added that these qualities were particularly critical for the future ruler of Gandhara, a kingdom that, unlike others, could not even marry off its princesses freely. His words stung, for they were a pointed jab at his father, Subhala, who had married off his daughters to the blind Dhritarashtra, not out of choice, but in fear of Bhishma. The subtle insult hung in the air, leaving Subhala silent and the royal gurus uneasy. Shakuni's words dripped with sarcasm, implying that Gandhara had been reduced to a position where it had no power over its own decisions, forced to bend to the will of others. Shakuni soon decided to leave Gandhara and relocate to Hastinapura with his wife, Arshi, and their newborn son, Uluka. Despite Subhala's insistence that he remain in Gandhara to prepare for his future role as king, Shakuni felt no attachment to the kingdom. His instincts pulled him toward Hastinapura, where he believed his presence was more crucial. To Shakuni, Gandhara was stagnant, while Hastinapura was a place where power shifted and alliances were forged. Ignoring his father's pleas, he set out for Hastinapura with his family, knowing that his future lay not in his homeland, but in the intrigues of the Kuru court, where he intended to play a decisive role. As days passed, the heavens stirred, and the king of the Pancha Mahabhutas, Indra, descended to earth in all his divine splendor to meet Pandu. The air around him shimmered with celestial energy, and the very earth seemed to bow in reverence to his presence. Indra spoke with Pandu, his voice carrying the authority of the cosmos and the wisdom of the stars. He revealed that he would bless Pandu and Kunti with a son, a child destined to become the greatest warrior the world had ever known. Indra, with his mastery of celestial knowledge, informed Pandu of a precise moment aligned perfectly with the movements of the stars and planets. He explained that if the child were born at that auspicious time, he would be endowed with all the finest qualities. This son would live his life guided by the principles of Dharma, unwavering in his adherence to righteousness. Through his dharmic path, even nature itself would conspire to support him in every endeavor, and he would achieve feats beyond the reach of ordinary human acts that would echo through eternity as a testament to human potential. Hearing Indra's words, Pandu's heart swelled with joy. It was as if the heavens had answered all his prayers. The thought of a son, born under such divine favor and destined for greatness, filled him with hope and pride. With a heart brimming with gratitude, Pandu returned to Kunti and shared the encounter with her. He told her everything that Indra had revealed: the precise time chosen by the stars, the divine assurance of greatness, and the promise that their third son would surpass all warriors, even the legendary Karthaviri Arjuna. Kunti, overjoyed by her husband's news, agreed without hesitation. She prepared herself for the sacred duty that lay ahead. On the day and hour foretold by Indra, Kunti performed a sacred bath, purifying her body and spirit in the cold waters of the mountain streams. Clad in white robes, her heart filled with devotion, she ascended the hilltop, the same sacred place where she had invoked the gods before. As the appointed time drew near, the skies darkened, and a divine stillness spread through the air. At the precise moment dictated by the stars, Indra descended once again from the heavens, his form radiant and majestic. Without delay, Indra united with Kunti, fulfilling the sacred union on earth. Through the divine process of Satyogarbham, the child was conceived and born instantly, bypassing the months of gestation that ordinary beings undergo. The infant's presence radiated strength and purity, a sign of his extraordinary destiny. His skin was soft as the morning breeze, and his gaze, though innocent, carried a hint of the greatness that awaited him. Indra, gazing upon the newborn, declared that the child would become everything Pandu and Kunti had wished for. He would earn the loyalty of his elders and teachers, living in complete obedience to his gurus. Most importantly, Indra foretold that this son would be the pillar of strength behind Yudhishthira's rise to power, ensuring that his elder brother would one day ascend as the emperor of Kuru dynasty. With those words, Indra blessed the child and returned to the heavens, his divine task fulfilled. Pandu, now holding his third son in his arms, felt a joy unlike any he had ever known. This child was the culmination of all his prayers, born of the penance he had performed, standing on a single leg from sunrise to sunset for an entire year. His heart brimmed with pride, knowing that this son would be a beacon of strength for his family and a protector of his brothers. News of the birth quickly spread through the Shatashringa as the rishis gathered at Pandu's kutir. The sages, wise in the knowledge of time and celestial movements, examined the moment of the child's birth. They considered the alignment of stars, the constellation, and the zodiac sign under which he had been born. The rishis also reflected upon Indra's prophecy, that this boy would become a warrior greater than Karthaviri Arjuna, a force unmatched in battle and destined for unparalleled feats. After careful deliberation, the sages agreed upon a name that reflected his destined greatness. They called him Arjuna, a name that would come to symbolize clarity, purity of purpose, and unyielding prowess. Arjuna would not merely be a warrior, he would be a paragon of virtue, courage, and loyalty, a figure destined to shape the future of the Kuru dynasty. As the sages blessed the newborn, Kunti and Pandu stood by with hearts overflowing with joy. The arrival of Arjuna marked not only the fulfillment of Pandu's penance, but also the strengthening of the bond between the brothers. With Arjuna's birth, the family's future felt secure, and a new chapter began, a chapter that would see these brothers rise to greatness and restore righteousness to the land. Vishwakarma married his daughter, Sanya, to Suryadeva, the sun god. But Sanya soon found herself unable to bear the intense heat and shine of Surya. Struggling under the relentless warmth, she eventually left him without notice and descended to earth, where she took on the form of a horse to live in seclusion. Realizing her absence, Suryadeva searched across all realms. When he finally discovered her on earth, he transformed himself into a horse to join her. In their equine forms, Surya and Sanya were reunited, and from their union, 2 twin sons were born. Despite their parents' transformation, the twins appeared in human form and were named Nasatya and Dasru. Blessed by their divine lineage, the twins grew wise in Ayurveda, the ancient science of healing, becoming symbols of health and vitality. Through their mastery of healing arts, they brought wellness to all, and over time, these divine twins became known as the Ashwini Devatas, revered as the celestial physicians and embodiments of good health. Pandu maintained a steady stream of messages between Shatashringa and Hastinapura using trained pigeons. He proudly sent news of the birth of his sons, while receiving updates about the birth of Dhritarashtra's sons and news of Shakuni's marriage and the birth of his son. In Shatashringa, Kunti was now held in the highest regard, having borne children sired by the gods themselves. The sages, observing the greatness that seemed to surround her children, recognized her as the mother whose sons would be remembered throughout history for eternity. But this respect Kunti received weighed heavily on Madri's heart. Though a noble Kshatriya herself, she felt overshadowed, quietly aware of Kunti's role in continuing the Kuru dynasty with 3 sons, while in Hastinapura, Gandhari was delivering 100 heirs. Madri, unable to bear even a single child, felt a deep sadness. Her mind was plagued by the fear that, without children of her own, she would one day be overlooked by Pandu and his sons. This fear grew with each passing day. Fearing that her grief might be mistaken for jealousy, she held her silence, concealing her hurt and isolating herself from the joy surrounding her. Madri could not escape the belief ingrained in her that a woman who had not experienced motherhood was scarcely considered a woman at all. This thought brought an ache to her heart, and she struggled silently to conceal her sorrow, unwilling to appear envious. But her feelings were too powerful to suppress, and she often withdrew, shedding tears in solitude to release her pain. One day, overcome by sorrow, Madri retreated to weep alone, hoping to release some of the weight she had been carrying in silence. Pandu, however, happened upon her in that vulnerable moment. Shocked to see her in such despair, he urged her to reveal the cause of her pain. Madri, though reluctant at first, yielded to his concern. She confessed her sorrow, that while Gandhari had 100 sons and Kunti had borne 3 sons of great lineage, she herself had no child to hold, to nurture, or to carry on her name. She reminded Pandu of the importance of motherhood, the fulfillment it brought to a woman, and her own longing to be called mother. Understanding the depth of her sorrow, Pandu recalled the subtle changes in her demeanor since Kunti began bearing children. Feeling her pain keenly, he went to Kunti and explained Madri's plight. He asked Kunti to share with Madri the sacred mantra gifted by Vyasa, hoping that Madri too could experience the joy of motherhood. Kunti explained that there was a condition attached to the mantra. If she passed on the secret of the mantra to another, that person could use it only once, and from that point on, the mantra would lose its power, unable to be invoked again even by Kunti. Upon hearing this, Pandu fell into deep confusion. If Kunti gave the mantra to Madri, Madri could use it once, but after that, Pandu would be unable to have more sons. But if Kunti kept the mantra to herself, Pandu could have as many sons as he wished with any god in the world. Pandu realized that if he asked Kunti not to share the secret mantra to ensure more sons, it would be an act of selfishness on his part in this critical situation. With compassion overcoming his desire for legacy, Pandu made his decision, choosing to relieve Madri of her silent suffering. He requested that Kunti reveal the mantra to Madri, despite knowing this would be his last chance to have more children. Following her husband's wish, Kunti taught Madri the sacred invocation, detailing the process with utmost care. Understanding the significance of this final invocation, Pandu suggested to Madri that she call upon the Ashwini Devatas, Nasatya and Dasru, the twin gods known for their healing and health. Twin gods would grant her not just one son, but two, ensuring a powerful bond of brotherhood for her sons. Madri followed Kunti's instructions, performing the sacred bath in the river before ascending the hilltop. There, in the quiet sanctity of nature, she chanted the mantra with devotion. The Ashwini Devatas descended to earth in answer to her call. In their divine presence, Madri felt a profound connection, and the twin gods united with her. Through Sodyo Garbham, she bore twin sons instantly. The birth of these divine sons lifted Madri's sorrow, filling her heart with joy and gratitude. She now held in her arms the children she had longed for, her own legacy within the Kuru lineage. Pandu, witnessing this moment, felt fulfilled, knowing that his decision had brought happiness to Madri. As Pandu looked upon his twin sons, his heart swelled with profound happiness. His journey, marked by prayer, sacrifice, and a yearning for heirs, had now been fulfilled. The sages gathered to name the twins, carefully choosing titles that reflected their destined qualities and virtues. They named the firstborn Nakula, which means one who is without fault, or free from defects. The name also represents the mongoose, an animal known for its agility, cleverness, and protective nature. Qualities the sages saw as emblematic of this child's future. The second twin was named Sahadeva, meaning one who is with the gods, or one who is equal to the gods. This name, embodying wisdom and divine insight, reflected the blessings and foresight the child would carry, signifying a mind endowed with divine grace and understanding. Draupada, who had harbored resentment for years and undertook intense penance in the Himalayas, driven by his desire for Bhishma's downfall. The memory of his humiliation remained vivid in his mind, stemming from the moment he had faced insult before his ministers and court. His pride had been deeply wounded when a rejection from Hastinapura had arrived in response to Jarasanda's challenge to Panchala. That rejection had left an indelible mark on Draupada, intensifying his determination to seek justice and redemption through divine intervention. After years of unwavering devotion, Lord Shiva appeared before him, moved by the intensity of Draupadi's tapasya. Recognizing Draupadi's determination, Shiva granted him a boon. A son would be born to Drupada, a son who would one day be the cause of Bhishma's demise. Drupada was elated, his heart swelling with pride at the thought of his own son achieving the impossible, bringing down the mighty Bhishma, whom even Parashurama, an incarnation of Vishnu, had not defeated. With this divine assurance, Drupada returned to Panchala, filled with a new sense of purpose and pride. Upon his return, his wife, Prishati, welcomed him with joy, her heart lightened by his presence after such a long time. When Drupada shared the details of Shiva's boon with her, her happiness doubled. Both eagerly awaited the birth of this child who, by Shiva's blessing, would alter the course of history. In due time, Prishati became pregnant, and the kingdom, sharing in their excitement, awaited the arrival of the future prince. When the day of delivery arrived, everyone, including Drupada, eagerly awaited the birth of the son prophesied to bring about Bhishma's downfall. But when the maid assisting in the delivery called him into the chamber, what he saw left him utterly shocked. The child born to Prishati was not the son he had awaited, but a daughter. Drupada struggled to comprehend how this had happened. The supreme god, Shiva himself, had promised a son destined to end Bhishma's life. Then how could a girl have been born? Thinking swiftly and with caution, Drupada decided to conceal this unexpected turn. He gifted the maids with ample jewelry and wealth, instructing them to keep the birth of a daughter a secret. Only the story of a son's birth was to leave the chamber. Drupada issued a stern warning, declaring that if word ever spread that a girl had been born, not a boy, their lives would be at stake, and their heads would adorn the palace walls. Terrified by the king's words, the maids agreed to maintain absolute secrecy, ensuring that the world would know only of the birth of a prince. When Prishati recovered, she too was taken aback by the unexpected turn of events. She and Drupada discussed their confusion, grappling with the idea that Shiva's words could seem unfulfilled, but their faith in the god's prophecy remained unshaken. They believed that the divine boon must hold truth, even if its form was beyond their understanding. Deciding that Shiva's words would indeed come to pass, they resolved to raise their daughter as a son. Drupada publicly announced the birth of a prince, declaring the arrival of his long-awaited heir. To mark this auspicious occasion, he organized a grand celebration throughout the kingdom, filling every corner of Panchala with festivities and joy. The palace courtyard was adorned with vibrant banners and garlands, while musicians played joyful melodies that echoed through the city, creating an atmosphere of jubilation. The child was named Shikandi, meaning one who wears a crown, establishing her identity as a prince. And though Drupada's expectations had taken an unexpected shape, he remained convinced that the prophecy of Bhishma's downfall would one day be fulfilled through Shikandi, just as Lord Shiva had promised. As this new generation of warriors entered the world, each carried with them a unique essence, forged by their distinct mindsets, values, and strengths. In a world already complex with alliances, rivalries, and hidden ambitions, these young heirs were bound to shape the future in unforeseen ways. Their divergent paths, shaped by varying ideals and powers, would not only test their destinies, but redefine the world they inherited. Each would face challenges that would carve them into legends, and as their stories intertwined, they would leave an indelible mark on the course of history. The future of kingdoms, alliances, and the very balance of Dharma lay in their hands. The dawn of a new era awaited, and with it, a tale of loyalty, ambition, rivalry, and destiny that would echo through time forever.